What if the greatest monuments of the ancient world were never meant to be what we think? Across the globe, dozens of structures built thousands of years ago defy every modern attempt to explain their original purpose. Despite advances in archaeology, satellite imaging, and carbon dating, these sites remain stubbornly silent. Some were buried deliberately, others left half-finished, and a few are so precisely engineered that they seem to belong to a lost chapter of human ingenuity. By the end of this journey through 30 of the most debated ancient sites, you will see why the true function of places like Göbekli Tepe, Stonehenge, and the Nazca Lines remains an open wound in our understanding of the past. Why did hunter-gatherers build a massive stone circle before they invented the wheel? How did a subterranean chamber in Malta amplify a single voice to fill an entire complex? These are not questions with easy answers. They are invitations to rethink everything we assume about early civilizations. So what do you think drove these ancient builders to create such enduring puzzles? One site in southern Turkey has forced archaeologists to rewrite the entire timeline. Göbekli Tepe, a complex of massive stone circles perched on a hilltop, is roughly 11,000 years old. That places it thousands of years before the invention of pottery, before writing, and even before the first farming villages. The builders were hunter-gatherers, people who moved with the seasons and had no permanent settlements. Yet they carved and moved limestone pillars weighing many tons, arranged them in concentric rings, and decorated them with intricate carvings of animals like foxes, snakes, and birds. Then, for reasons still unknown, they deliberately buried the entire site under tons of earth, sealing it away from the world for millennia. That intentional burial is why so much of it remains intact today, preserved like a time capsule waiting to be opened. When archaeologists first uncovered these rings in the 1990s, they assumed the deepest layers had to be the oldest, but radiocarbon dating told a different story. The oldest structures were actually the most sophisticated. The earliest circles, built around 9500 BC, show the highest level of craftsmanship. Later additions became cruder over time, as if the builders were losing their skills rather than improving them. This reversal of the usual pattern of progress has left experts scratching their heads. So what was this place for? The leading theory proposes that Göbekli Tepe was a ritual center, a sacred gathering ground where scattered hunter-gatherer bands met for ceremonies, feasts, and social bonding. The animal carvings might represent spirit guides or clan totems, and the circles themselves could have been open-air temples. Another idea suggests it served as an astronomical observatory, with the pillars aligned to track stars and seasons. A more radical view holds that the site functioned as a sort of prehistoric university, a place where knowledge about the cosmos, animal behavior, and survival was passed down orally. Perhaps the most provocative theory is that Göbekli Tepe was not just a religious site but a catalyst for the entire Neolithic revolution. The argument goes like this: to build such a massive structure, hunter-gatherers had to cooperate in large numbers over extended periods. That cooperation required stable food supplies, so they began to cultivate wild grains and manage herds of animals, not out of necessity but to support the labor force building the temple. In other words, the need to gather for worship may have invented farming, not the other way around. That idea turns the traditional story of civilization on its head. Agriculture did not create religion. Religion created agriculture. No consensus exists, and every theory has its gaps. For example, there is no evidence of permanent housing nearby, so where did all those workers sleep, and why bury the entire complex after using it for centuries? Did a shifting climate force abandonment, or was the burial itself a deliberate act of closing a sacred space? The site challenges the very foundation of what we thought we knew about early human societies. These people were supposed to be simple wanderers, but they built something that would require advanced planning, engineering, and social coordination. Göbekli Tepe stands as a reminder that our ancestors were far more capable, complex, and mysterious than we often give them credit for, and it leaves us wondering what other surprises lie buried beneath the ground, waiting to reshape our story. On the Salisbury Plain in England, a circle of enormous stones has stood for over 4,000 years. Stonehenge is perhaps the most famous ancient monument on Earth, yet its original purpose remains as elusive as the mist that often wraps around its pillars. The site was not built all at once. Construction spanned more than a dozen centuries, from roughly 3000 BC to around 1600 BC. The earliest phase was a simple circular ditch and bank, but later generations added the enormous sarsen stones, each weighing around 25 tons, and the smaller bluestones that were transported all the way from the Preseli Hills in Wales, nearly 200 miles away. Only a society with deep motivation and strong organization could have moved such loads over such distances without the wheel or metal tools. The most famous feature of Stonehenge is its alignment with the solstices. On midsummer sunrise, the sun rises directly above the heel stone and shines into the center of the circle. On midwinter sunset, the light falls in the opposite direction. This celestial tuning is so precise that many scholars believe the monument functioned as a ritual calendar, marking the turning points of the year for agricultural festivals or religious ceremonies. But was it simply a calendar? Other ideas have emerged over the decades. A healing center theory gained traction after archaeologists noticed that many of the bluestones were believed in medieval times to have magical healing properties. The nearby discovery of burials showing signs of injury or illness gave weight to the idea that pilgrims traveled to Stonehenge seeking a cure. Yet the effort required to build the monument seems excessive for a clinic, even a prehistoric one. Another hypothesis suggests Stonehenge was a burial ground for elite families. The remains of cremated individuals have been found in the Aubrey Holes, a ring of pits inside the outer bank. Some estimates count over 150 burials, making it one of the largest Neolithic cemeteries in Britain. But burial alone does not explain the massive stones, the careful alignments, or the hundreds of years of modification. A more ambitious theory treats Stonehenge as an astronomical computer, a machine for predicting eclipses and tracking lunar cycles. While the alignments are real, the idea that the builders had a sophisticated predictive system remains controversial. There is no written record to confirm it. Perhaps the most compelling recent view sees Stonehenge as a symbol of political unity. Around the time the Great Sarsens were erected, communities across Britain were coming together in unprecedented cooperation. The monument may have been a statement of shared identity, a monumental project that required labor from many tribes and regions. The transport of the bluestones from Wales, for instance, could have been a ritual journey, each group contributing a stone to the central shrine. In this reading, Stonehenge was less a tool and more a declaration, a physical anchor for a newly unified society. Recent discoveries have only deepened the mystery. In the last few years, archaeologists using ground-penetrating radar found a ring of massive pits surrounding the site at Durrington Walls, just 2 miles away. These pits, each more than 30 feet across, appear to have held timber posts or standing stones, creating a much larger ceremonial landscape than anyone imagined. The entire area around Stonehenge may have been a vast ritual zone, with processions moving between timber circles, henge monuments, and the stone circle itself. This suggests that the function of Stonehenge was part of a much larger network of beliefs and practices, not a single isolated purpose. Yet for all the theories, no explanation fully accounts for the monument's design, its precision, and the staggering effort of its construction. Why drag stones across half of Britain just to mark the solstices? Why build a structure that took generations to complete, then leave no clear record of what it meant? Stonehenge stands as a question that refuses a simple answer, a reminder that some of the most impressive achievements of the ancient world may have been built for reasons we can only guess at. And as technology improves, new surprises continue to emerge, keeping the mystery alive. The Great Pyramid of Giza stands as the most mathematically precise structure ever built in the ancient world. Its base is almost a perfect square, with sides that vary by less than 2 inches across a span of 750 feet. The entire monument was originally covered in gleaming white limestone casing stones, fitted so tightly that a razor blade could not slide between them. This level of accuracy, achieved with copper tools and wooden levers, has baffled engineers for centuries. Inside, the pyramid contains a series of chambers and passages that seem deliberately complex. The King's Chamber, built from massive granite blocks weighing up to 80 tons, sits at the heart of the structure. Above it, 5 relieving chambers distribute the weight of the pyramid, a solution that modern architects recognize as brilliant but ancient. 2 narrow shafts run from the King's Chamber out to the pyramid's exterior, and 2 more run from the Queen's Chamber, though those originally did not reach the outside. The mainstream explanation is straightforward. The pyramid was a tomb for Pharaoh Khufu, built around 2500 BC, but the evidence for this is surprisingly thin. No burial inscription, no sarcophagus lid, no grave goods have ever been found inside the King's Chamber. The only object discovered was an empty granite box, cracked and missing its lid, and there is no mummy. The so-called air shafts are also puzzling. Their design suggests they served a purpose beyond ventilation. They align with specific stars in the northern and southern skies, including the constellation Orion, which held deep religious meaning for the Egyptians. Some researchers propose that the shafts were passageways for the pharaoh's soul to travel to the afterlife. But why build such precise channels if they were only symbolic? The subterranean chamber adds another layer of confusion. Cut roughly into the bedrock beneath the pyramid, it is unfinished and lacks the refinement of the upper rooms. Some believe it was abandoned during construction, but others argue its rough state was intentional, perhaps representing the underworld or a place of initiation. The construction methods themselves remain a subject of fierce debate. Moving 2 million stone blocks, each averaging 2.5 tons, to a height of nearly 500 feet would challenge modern engineers even with cranes and steel. The ancient Egyptians left no blueprints, no written accounts of how they did it. Ramps, internal spirals, and water-based techniques have all been proposed, but none fully explain the logistics. These unresolved details have fueled alternative theories that go far beyond a royal tomb. One popular idea suggests the pyramid was a power plant. Proponents point to the conductivity of the granite in the King's Chamber, the alignment of the shafts, and the possibility that the pyramid could have converted vibrations or electromagnetic energy into usable power. Another theory casts it as an astronomical observatory, its angled passages tracking solstices and equinoxes with an accuracy that rivals modern instruments. A more esoteric view sees the pyramid as an initiation site for priestly rites, where candidates were subjected to sensory deprivation or altered states of consciousness in the chambers. And there is the geodetic theory, which argues that the pyramid's dimensions encode the circumference of the Earth. The base perimeter, multiplied by some factor, yields a number remarkably close to the planet's equatorial measurement. Coincidence or design? Each alternative explanation explains some features but stumbles on others. The power plant idea cannot explain the relieving chambers or the burial chambers design. The observatory theory accounts for the shafts but not the enormous mass of stone. The initiation hypothesis relies on cultural references that are largely speculative. And the geodetic claim requires the Egyptians to have known the exact size of the Earth, which would have been impossible by conventional history. What makes the Great Pyramid so deeply compelling is that no single theory can account for all of its features. Every answer raises new questions: the precision, the empty chambers, the silent shafts, the missing inscription. All of it combines into a puzzle that refuses to be solved. The monument itself remains stubborn and silent, daring us to guess its true purpose. And as long as new measurements, scans, and analyses keep yielding unexpected results, the debate will only grow louder. In the Peruvian desert, lines stretch for miles across the dry ground, forming shapes that are impossible to see from the surface. The Nazca Lines, carved into the arid coastal plain of southern Peru, cover an area of nearly 200 square miles. They were created between 500 BC and 500 AD by the Nazca people, who removed the reddish iron oxide pebbles that cover the desert surface, exposing the lighter soil beneath. The result is a vast gallery of geometric patterns, straight lines, and dozens of animal figures, including a hummingbird, a spider, a monkey, and a condor. Some of the line drawings stretch more than 1,000 feet across, yet they are so faint that they can only be fully appreciated from the air. This detail, that the figures were meant to be seen from above, is what makes the Nazca Lines such a perplexing mystery. Why would a pre-industrial society create art that no one on the ground could ever fully see? The earliest theories proposed that the lines served as an astronomical calendar, aligned to the sun, moon, and stars to mark the changing seasons for planting and harvesting. Some researchers measured alignments with the solstices and certain star groups, suggesting the Nazca used the lines to time their agricultural cycles. But later studies found that only a small fraction of the lines showed any clear astronomical alignment. Most pointed in random directions, making the calendar theory incomplete. Another idea suggests the lines were part of a vast water management system. The desert region is one of the driest on Earth, and water was a precious resource. Some of the lines run directly toward underground aquifers, and the spiral shapes might represent water sources. In this view, the lines were a map of hidden water, guiding people to the life-giving springs that sustained their civilization. Yet the connection is loose, and many lines do not correspond to any known water source. A more recent hypothesis treats the Nazca Lines as ritual walking paths. The straight lines, some stretching for miles in perfect geometry, may have been used for ceremonial processions. Footprints have been found along certain paths, showing that people did walk them, perhaps during religious festivals. The animal figures might have been clan symbols, and walking along the figure's outline could have been a form of prayer or a way to connect with ancestral spirits. Archaeologists have even suggested that the entire area functioned as a sacred landscape, a place where the boundary between the earthly and the divine became thin. The most famous alternative theory ties the lines to extraterrestrial visitors. This idea gained popularity in the 1970s when writer Erich von Däniken proposed that the lines were landing strips for alien spacecraft. The straight lines are strikingly long and arrow-straight, and the only way to appreciate the animal figures is from above. The argument that ancient people could not have built such precise geometry without aerial guidance has captured the imagination of millions. But mainstream archaeologists point out that the Nazca could have used simpler methods, such as surveying with cords and stakes, to achieve straight lines over long distances. The figures themselves can be created using a grid system, as demonstrated by modern experiments. Even the idea that they were meant to be seen from above might be explained by religious beliefs. The Nazca might have believed their gods lived in the sky and that the lines were messages or offerings meant only for those celestial eyes. In recent years, drone technology has transformed the study of the Nazca Lines. Drones have revealed dozens of new figures that were previously invisible, eroded by time or buried under sand. Some are older than the famous animal shapes, suggesting that the tradition of drawing on the desert goes back even further than historians once thought. Among the new discoveries are figures of a cat, a parrot, and a pair of humanoid figures with what look like headdresses. Each new discovery adds complexity to the puzzle. Some figures appear to overlap, meaning the lines were reused or modified over centuries, perhaps for different purposes at different times. Despite decades of research, no single explanation accounts for the scale, the variety, and the mystery of the Nazca Lines. They seem to combine several functions at once: a calendar, a map, a ritual pathway, a religious offering. Perhaps the lines were never meant to serve one purpose. They might have been a living document, evolving with the beliefs and needs of the people who created them. The desert holds its secrets close. As new technology reveals more figures and more lines, the questions only multiply. Why did a people living in one of the harshest environments on Earth devote so much time and effort to drawing shapes that only the sky could see? Perhaps the answer lies not in what the lines were for, but in what they meant to the Nazca themselves, a meaning that vanished when their civilization faded into the dust. High above the city of Cusco, walls of stone defy explanation. Sacsayhuamán rises on a hill overlooking the former Inca capital, a massive complex of terraces and plazas built from blocks that seem to belong to a different age. The most astonishing feature is the cyclopean masonry, enormous polygonal stones, some weighing over 100 tons, fitted together so precisely that not even a sheet of paper can slip between them. The blocks are not rectangular like typical bricks. They have irregular shapes with multiple faces and angles, yet each one locks into its neighbor as if the entire wall were a single piece of stone. This kind of construction, known as polygonal masonry, is incredibly stable. Earthquakes have shaken the region for centuries, and the walls at Sacsayhuamán remain intact while later Spanish buildings nearby have crumbled. The Inca builders did not use mortar. They relied entirely on the perfect interlocking of the stones. How they achieved this without modern tools, without the wheel, and without iron is a puzzle that has never been fully solved. Conventional explanations suggest they shaped each stone by hammering with harder rocks, then slowly grinding the surfaces until they matched. But the time and labor required for a single block would have been staggering, and the sheer number of stones at Sacsayhuamán makes the task seem nearly impossible. Some researchers propose that the Inca used a system of trial and error, lifting each stone into place, marking where it did not fit, lowering it again, and repeating the process. Even that method would demand extraordinary patience and organization. The precision is so fine that the stones appear to have been poured into place like liquid, though no evidence of any lost technique has ever been found. What was Sacsayhuamán actually for? The most common answer is that it was a fortress. Its location on a steep hill, its massive walls with triple terraces, and its zigzag shape all suggest defensive purposes. The Inca ruler Pachacuti is said to have built it after his conquest of the region, and Spanish chroniclers described it as a stronghold. Yet no records exist of a major battle fought there, and the Inca army typically fought in open fields, not from behind walls. Another theory sees Sacsayhuamán as a ceremonial center. The site contains large plazas where thousands of people could gather for festivals. The zigzag walls are said to represent the teeth of a puma, which was a sacred animal to the Inca. The city of Cusco itself was laid out in the shape of a puma, with Sacsayhuamán forming the head. In this interpretation, the complex was not a fort but a spiritual and political symbol, a monument to the power of the Inca state and its connection to the divine. A more practical theory suggests that Sacsayhuamán was part of an extensive hydrological system. The site has channels, aqueducts, and underground conduits that once carried water from nearby springs to the city below. The walls themselves may have served to protect these waterworks from erosion or enemy interference. Water was central to Inca religion and agriculture, and controlling its flow would have been both practical and sacred. In Tairemi, the Festival of the Sun is still celebrated at Sacsayhuamán every winter solstice, drawing thousands of modern visitors who watch reenactments of Inca ceremonies. This ongoing use reinforces the idea that the site held deep ritual meaning, but it does not explain why the builders chose such extraordinary masonry for what might have been a simple water management structure. The debate over Sacsayhuamán's true function reflects a broader tension in archaeology. A single site can serve multiple purposes across different eras, and the Inca themselves may have intended it as a layered symbol. Defensive, ceremonial, political, and hydrological elements all seem to blend together. The walls themselves, however, remain the longest-lasting puzzle. They are a physical lesson in the limits of our knowledge. How a civilization with bronze tools and no draft animals managed to shape, transport, and fit stones of such size and precision is a question that modern engineers still struggle to answer. The exact method, and therefore the exact purpose, continues to be seriously debated. Sacsayhuamán stands as a silent testament to a skill that was lost when the Spanish conquest dismantled the Inca world, leaving us only the stones and the mystery. Beneath the streets of Malta, a deeper mystery waits. The Hypogeum of Hal Saflieni is a subterranean complex carved entirely from solid limestone, a labyrinth of chambers, passages, and halls that descends more than 30 feet below ground. It was discovered by accident in 1902 during construction work, and what workers found inside changed the understanding of prehistoric Mediterranean societies. The Hypogeum contains multiple levels, each linked by steps and narrow doorways, with ceilings that mimic the shape of temples built above ground. The walls are decorated with red ochre spirals and geometric patterns, some of the oldest painted art in the world. But it is what else lay inside that raises the most unsettling questions. When archaeologists excavated the site, they uncovered the remains of more than 7,000 individuals. The bones were found in scattered piles, some in chambers, others in deeper recesses. Some appear to have been arranged with care, others disturbed. The sheer number suggests this was a communal burial site, a necropolis used over many centuries. Yet the Hypogeum is far more than a simple tomb. The chambers are too elaborate, the acoustics too deliberate. One room in particular, now called the Oracle Room, is cut from stone in such a way that any sound produced inside it resonates throughout the entire complex. A male voice speaking in a low tone can be heard clearly in every chamber above and below, while a female voice produces a different effect. The resonance is not a fluke. The carvers deliberately shaped the walls and ceiling to focus sound. This acoustic design has led to several theories about the Hypogeum's true function. Some researchers believe it was a temple for oracles, where a priest or priestess would speak from the oracle room, and their voice would seem to come from the earth itself, giving divine pronouncements to a hidden audience. Others see it as a cult site for the dead, where rituals were performed to communicate with ancestors. The resonance might have induced altered states of consciousness, allowing participants to experience visions or trance-like states during ceremonies. The red ochre paintings, often associated with ritual blood or rebirth, support this idea of a space designed for spiritual transformation, but no single theory fits all the evidence. The presence of so many individuals suggests long-term use for burial, but the acoustic design suggests something more active, more performative. Perhaps the Hypogeum served multiple purposes over time, starting as a sacred space for rituals and later becoming a final resting place for the community. The exact sequence remains unknown. Modern experiments have shown that standing inside the oracle room and chanting at a certain frequency can affect the brain, creating a sense of floating or disorientation. Whether ancient people knew this and intentionally used it for religious practice is a question that may never be answered. The Hypogeum of Hal Saflieni stands as one of the most sophisticated underground structures ever built by a prehistoric society. Its true function, like the sound that still echoes through its chambers, remains tantalizingly out of reach. On the eastern coast of Ireland, a mound of earth and stone holds a secret older than the pyramids. Newgrange rises from the green landscape like a giant grass-covered hill, but beneath that gentle exterior lies a carefully constructed passage leading to a central chamber. The entire structure was built around 3200 BC, which means it was already ancient when the first stones of Stonehenge were being raised. For 5,000 years, the chamber sat in total darkness, sealed from the outside world. But once a year, on the morning of the winter solstice, something extraordinary happens. A narrow opening above the entrance, called the roof box, allows a single beam of sunlight to travel the full length of the passage and illuminate the inner chamber. For just 17 minutes, the darkness is pushed back by a shaft of golden light that strikes the back wall before fading. This alignment is not a coincidence. It was engineered with remarkable precision, using the curve of the passage and the angle of the roof box to capture the lowest arc of the winter sun. The builders of Newgrange were clearly skilled astronomers, able to track the sun's movement across the seasons and lock that knowledge into stone. But what was the purpose of this light show? The mainstream interpretation calls Newgrange a passage tomb, a burial place for elite members of Neolithic society. The remains of several individuals were discovered in small stone basins within the chamber during early excavations. This suggests that the dead were placed here, perhaps repeatedly over centuries, yet the number of remains is surprisingly small for a monument of this size and complexity. No grand burial of a single ruler has been found, and the chamber itself is remarkably clean. Later excavations found very few human remains, and those that were present showed signs of disturbance, as if the space had been entered and rearranged many times. This scarcity has led some researchers to question whether burial was the primary function. Perhaps the dead were only placed here temporarily, as part of a larger ritual cycle. Or maybe the remains that were found came from later periods, when the original meaning of the site had already been forgotten. Another theory treats Newgrange as a solar calendar, a way to mark the turning of the year for agricultural communities. The winter solstice was a crucial moment, the darkest day followed by the promise of returning light. The roof box beam could have signaled the time for planting or for holding festivals that brought scattered communities together. In this view, Newgrange acted as a communal clock, one that required no written numbers because the sun itself kept the time. The precision of the alignment supports this idea, but it does not explain why the builders chose to create a sealed chamber instead of an open plaza where everyone could watch the sunrise. The third major interpretation sees Newgrange as a ritual space for communicating with ancestors. The passage and chamber may have represented a doorway to the underworld, and the solstice light could have been a moment when the boundary between the living and the dead grew thin. The Celtic myths that later grew up around the site describe it as the dwelling place of the god Dagda and a gateway to the otherworld. While these stories were written down thousands of years after Newgrange was built, they may echo older beliefs that were passed down orally. The roof box itself is a mystery. Why did the builders leave a gap in the roof instead of sealing the chamber completely? If the only goal was a tomb, there was no need for a light shaft. The opening required extra engineering, a weak point in the structure that had to be carefully waterproofed. That effort implies that the light itself was essential. Whatever ritual took place in that brief moment of illumination must have been of profound importance. The lack of clear evidence for a single specific use has kept Newgrange at the center of debate. It is undeniably a marvel of Neolithic engineering, with a corbelled roof that has held up for 5 millennia without collapsing. Its astronomical alignment is undeniable. But whether it was a tomb, a calendar, or a sanctuary for the spirits of the dead remains an open question. Perhaps it was all three at different times. The site shows signs of use over many centuries, with changes, repairs, and modifications that suggest its meaning evolved. What we are left with is a structure that answered a need so powerful that an entire community devoted years of labor to building it, then returned to it generation after generation. The solstice light still breaks through the roof box every December, illuminating an empty chamber that waits for us to understand. On a remote island in the Pacific, nearly 900 stone figures gaze inland, their backs to the sea. These are the moai of Rapa Nui, better known as Easter Island, and they have fascinated the world ever since European explorers first arrived in the early 1700s. Carved from volcanic tuff, a compressed ash that hardens like rock, each statue stands between 10 and 40 feet tall and can weigh up to 80 tons. The classic theory holds that the moai were ancestral representations, carved to honor chiefs or high-ranking individuals after their passing. The statues were placed on stone platforms called ahu, which ringed the coastline, and they were meant to watch over the community, offering protection and transmitting the mana or spiritual power of the ancestors to the living. This explanation made sense for decades and is still widely taught, but it leaves many details unexplained. For one, why are so many moai found not on the coastal platforms but scattered across the island's interior, abandoned in quarries or lying face down along ancient roads? The transportation method alone has sparked endless debate. How did a society with no wheels, no draft animals, and only a limited supply of timber move statues of such immense weight across miles of rugged terrain? Early accounts from the 1800s describe the moai as having been walked upright, like a person shifting their weight from side to side. Modern experiments have shown that a small group of people using ropes can indeed walk a replica moai, rocking it forward step by step. But that requires a continuous supply of strong rope and coordinated effort. Other theories suggest the statues were placed on wooden sleds or rolled on logs, a method that would have required massive deforestation. The island was once covered in palm forest, but by the time the last moai were carved, the trees were nearly gone. Some researchers argue that the very act of transporting the statues contributed to the collapse of the island's ecosystem, a cautionary tale of resource overshoot. Yet even that story does not explain why the interior moai were left unfinished or abandoned. Were they simply casualties of a society in crisis, or did they serve a different purpose altogether? Recent excavations have added a new layer to the mystery. Archaeologists digging around some of the moai discovered that they are not just heads. Each statue has a full body buried beneath the ground. Over centuries, soil and debris accumulated, covering the torsos and leaving only the oversized heads visible. When the soil was removed, researchers found petroglyphs carved into the stone of the buried bodies, images of birds, fish, and spirals that had never been seen before. These carvings appear on the backs and chests of the moai, suggesting that the statues held additional layers of meaning, perhaps representing specific clans, lineages, or mythological events. The petroglyphs may have been added over generations, turning each moai into a kind of historical record. This discovery complicates the simple ancestor worship theory. Why go to the trouble of carving symbols on body parts that would be hidden beneath the platform? Perhaps the statues were meant to be periodically re-erected or repositioned, with the hidden carvings only visible during ceremonial moments. Or perhaps the carvings were directed toward the spirits themselves, a private message to the ancestors that only the divine could see. The political dimension is equally debated. The moai are not all identical. Some are taller, with larger headdresses made of red scoria, a different type of volcanic rock. These top knots, called pukao, may have indicated higher status. The effort required to carve, move, and place a moai would have demanded significant labor and resources. Controlling that production could have been a source of power. Competing clans may have built increasingly larger moai to assert dominance, leading to an arms race of stone. In this view, the statues were not just religious icons but political tools, symbols of authority that reinforced the social hierarchy. The interior moai, abandoned in the quarry, might represent a breaking point, a moment when the competition became unsustainable and the entire system collapsed. Yet no written records exist, and the oral traditions passed down on Rapa Nui have been fragmented by colonialism, disease, and cultural disruption. We are left with the statues themselves, silent witnesses to a society that poured everything into stone. The debate over whether they were primarily religious or primarily political may have no single answer. Like the people who carved them, the moai are layered, complex, and only partially understood. Each new excavation, each fresh analysis of the petroglyphs, each re-examination of the old theories reveals how much we still do not know. The mystery of the moai endures, inviting us to wonder what drove those ancient sculptors to spend generations shaping the volcanic rock into a silent army that still stands guard over a lonely island. On the eastern coast of China, a hidden world lies beneath the surface. In Zhejiang province, near the village of Longyou, a series of massive artificial caverns were accidentally discovered in 1992. Local villagers were draining a pond when they found an opening in the rock, and what they uncovered left archaeologists stunned. The Longyou Grottoes are a network of at least 24 man-made chambers carved into soft siltstone, a sedimentary rock that is surprisingly easy to shape when wet but hardens after exposure to air. The largest chamber covers more than 1,000 square meters, and the ceilings rise as high as 30 meters. Inside, the walls are covered in parallel chisel marks, so uniform and perfectly spaced that they look like they were made by a machine. Staircases lead down from the surface, and massive stone pillars support the roofs, each one carefully shaped and left in place to prevent collapse. The precision of the carving is remarkable. The walls meet the floors and ceilings at near-perfect right angles, and the entire complex is arranged in a symmetrical layout that suggests a master plan. Yet no historical records mention these caverns, no ancient text, no local legend, no official document from any Chinese dynasty refers to their construction. The first written account of the grottos comes from the modern era after they were rediscovered. This absence of documentation is one of the most puzzling aspects of the site. Who built them, when, and why? Carbon dating of organic material found inside has produced a wide range of dates, from as early as 200 BC to as late as 800 AD. But the samples are inconclusive because the caverns were used for different purposes over time, including as a fish farm and a storage space. The tool marks, however, offer a clue. The chisel marks are all the same width and depth, indicating that the builders used a standardized tool, perhaps a type of chisel or pick that was widely available. But no such tools have been found at the site, nor any debris from the carving process. The stone that was removed, estimated at nearly 1 million cubic meters, simply vanished. There are no piles of rubble nearby, no evidence of where the excavated material was taken. This has led to speculation that the stone was used for construction elsewhere, but that would require a massive transportation effort, and again, no records confirm it. The theories about the grotto's purpose range widely. The most straightforward idea is that they were stone quarries, providing building material for nearby towns or temples. The soft siltstone is easy to carve and could have been used for walls, floors, or decorative elements. Yet the caverns themselves are far more elaborate than a simple quarry. The careful symmetry, the pillars left in place for structural support, and the clean staircases all suggest that the builders intended the caverns to be used as spaces, not just as sources of stone. A quarry would not need such precise alignment or polished walls. Another theory proposes that the grottos were military shelters, hidden refuges built to protect local populations during times of conflict. The underground location, the network of chambers, and the camouflaged entrances would have made an ideal hideout. But there are no fortifications, no defensive structures, and no evidence of weapons or storage of supplies. The chambers are too open and accessible to be a secure bunker. A third idea casts the grottos as an abandoned palace complex. The scale and craftsmanship suggest a project of immense importance, perhaps commissioned by a local ruler or a wealthy clan. The pillars, the symmetrical layout, and the clean walls resemble the style of above-ground temples from the same era. Yet no historical records mention a palace being built underground, and the lack of decoration or inscriptions is unusual for a royal project. Why go to such effort and then leave no markings to claim ownership? The most intriguing theory is that the grottos were never finished. The uniformity of the tool marks across all chambers suggests that the work stopped suddenly, at a point when the entire complex was still in progress. Perhaps the project was abandoned due to a change in political power, a natural disaster, or a shift in religious beliefs. The entrances were then sealed or covered by natural processes, and the caverns were forgotten for centuries. This would explain why no records exist. The builders never completed their work, and the site was lost before it could be documented. What makes the Longyou Grottoes so compelling is the sheer scale of the labor involved. Carving even one chamber would have required years of work by hundreds of workers. Removing 1 million cubic meters of stone by hand, with only chisels and hammers, would have taken generations. And after all that effort, the builders left no trace of their identity, no explanation of their purpose. The caverns stand empty, their walls covered in those mysterious parallel marks, waiting for someone to decipher the message they hold. The mystery deepens when you consider that the grottos were deliberately hidden. The original entrances were covered by water, suggesting that the builders intended for the caverns to remain concealed. Why build something so monumental, then hide it away? Perhaps the answer lies in the spiritual beliefs of the time. Some researchers have proposed that the grottos were sacred spaces, designed for rituals that required secrecy and silence. The uniform chisel marks might have been part of the ceremony, each stroke representing a prayer or an offering, but no artifacts, no altars, and no religious symbols have been found inside. The chambers are as clean as if they were swept before being sealed. The Longyou Grottoes remain one of the most enigmatic archaeological sites in the world, a puzzle that refuses to yield a clear answer. As new survey techniques and dating methods are applied, fresh theories emerge, but the fundamental question persists. Why did an ancient society invest so much effort into carving a vast underground complex, only to abandon it and leave no record of its existence? The stillness of those chambers, the silence of those walls, is a reminder that some of the greatest achievements of the past were not meant to be understood by future generations. They were simply left behind to be discovered and wondered at, never fully explained. High in the Bolivian Andes, blocks of stone lie scattered like the bones of a forgotten giant. Puma Punku, part of the larger Tiwanaku complex near Lake Titicaca, is a place where the rules of ancient construction seem to break down. The ruins consist of massive slabs of diorite and sandstone, some weighing over 100 tons, cut with a precision that would challenge modern computer-guided machinery. Each block features perfectly straight edges, 90-degree angles, and intricate cutouts that interlock with neighboring stones like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. Some blocks have drill-like holes bored through them, smooth and cylindrical, as if made by a power tool. The surfaces are so flat and polished that they resemble factory-finished stone rather than something hammered out by hand. The craftsmanship is so advanced that conventional archaeology struggles to explain how a pre-Columbian society, with no iron tools and no hard metals beyond bronze, could shape such hard rock with such consistency and speed. There is no evidence of trial and error, no discarded blocks with failed cuts. Everything fits together perfectly, or at least it did before the site was destroyed. What was Puma Punku? The most common theory calls it a ceremonial center, a place where the Tiwanaku people gathered for religious festivals and rituals. The layout includes a large plaza, a terraced platform, and a sunken courtyard, all oriented with astronomical alignments that suggest the site was used to mark solstices and equinoxes. A gateway carved from a single block of stone, known as the Gate of the Sun, contains intricate reliefs of a figure that many believe to be a creator deity. This has led scholars to propose that Puma Punku was a temple dedicated to a supreme being, a place where priests conducted ceremonies and the community made offerings. Yet the lack of any written records or clear iconographic explanations leaves the exact nature of those rituals open to speculation. The astronomical alignment theory suggests that Puma Punku functioned as a giant calendar, its platforms and courtyards designed to track the movement of the sun, moon, and stars. The precision of the stonework would have allowed for extremely accurate measurements, and the orientation of certain structures aligns with key celestial events. But why go to such extreme lengths in stonework if the only purpose was to track the seasons? A calendar could be carved on a single flat surface. The interlocking blocks and drill holes seem excessive for a mere timekeeping device. A more radical theory proposes that Puma Punku was a machine, a device for harnessing or directing some form of energy. The blocks interlock so precisely that they could have formed a sealed chamber or a conduit for vibrations, sound, or even electricity. Proponents point to the drill holes as evidence of advanced technology, suggesting they might have held metal rods or conduits. Some have even claimed that the site was an ancient power plant, using the high altitude and the properties of the stone to generate usable energy. Mainstream archaeologists dismiss these ideas as speculative fantasy, pointing out that no evidence of metal fittings or wires has ever been found. The drill holes, they argue, could have been made using a simple bow drill with sand as an abrasive, a technique that is slow but possible. The interlocking shapes, they say, are a feature of earthquake-resistant construction, common in regions with seismic activity. Yet the scale and precision remain unmatched anywhere else in the ancient world, and the absence of any known tool marks that match the expected abrasion patterns only deepens the puzzle. The mystery is compounded by the state of the site today. Puma Punku was heavily looted over the centuries, and the original layout is largely unknown. Spanish colonial records mention that the site was used as a quarry for building materials, with stones being hauled away for churches and bridges. Earthquakes have toppled the remaining structures. What we see now is a chaotic field of broken blocks, many of them lying where they fell, making it nearly impossible to reconstruct the original arrangement. Some blocks are still partially buried, waiting for future excavations. The lack of a complete plan means that theories about function are based on fragments, educated guesses, and comparisons to other Tiwanaku sites. This uncertainty has made Puma Punku a lightning rod for alternative history enthusiasts, who see it as proof of lost advanced civilizations or even extraterrestrial contact. For mainstream archaeologists, it remains an exasperating challenge, a reminder that sometimes the stonework itself is the message, and we have not yet learned how to read it. The debate over Puma Punku shows no signs of settling because the evidence is too ambiguous and the stonework too precise. It stands as a testament to human ingenuity and a question mark that refuses to become a period. Whatever its true purpose, the site continues to draw researchers and visitors alike, all of them trying to piece together the story of a people who left behind a puzzle carved in stone. The largest city in the pre-Columbian Americas left no written word behind. Teotihuacan, located in the highlands of central Mexico, was a metropolis of over 100,000 people at its peak, with broad avenues, massive plazas, and two of the most enormous pyramids ever built. The Pyramid of the Sun rises over 200 feet, its base nearly matching the Great Pyramid of Giza in area. The Pyramid of the Moon anchors the northern end of the Avenue of the Dead, a wide causeway that runs for nearly 2 miles through the heart of the city. Every stone, every alignment, every sculpted face speaks of a culture with deep knowledge of astronomy, engineering, and urban planning. Yet no one has ever found a single piece of writing from Teotihuacan. No inscriptions, no codices, no carved texts. The people who built this great city remain silent, and their intentions are left for us to guess. The lack of written records has forced archaeologists to rely on physical clues, and those clues paint a picture that is tantalizingly incomplete. The pyramids themselves offer the first layer of mystery. The Pyramid of the Sun sits directly above a natural cave, a tunnel that leads deep into the earth. That cave was modified and shaped by human hands, with chambers and passages that suggest ritual use. The pyramid was built over this cave, as if the structure itself was a marker for a sacred underworld entrance. The Pyramid of the Moon also sits above a burial chamber, and excavations have revealed remains of individuals who may have been sacrificed as part of dedication ceremonies. These discoveries point to a deep religious significance, but the details remain unclear. Was Teotihuacan a pilgrimage center, a place where people from across Mesoamerica came to worship a common deity? The city's layout, with its wide avenues and massive plazas, could have accommodated huge crowds for festivals. The Pyramid of the Sun, aligned with the setting sun on 2 specific days of the year, suggests that celestial events were central to the city's calendar. Pilgrims might have walked the Avenue of the Dead, climbing the pyramids at key moments to offer tribute or seek visions, but the evidence for pilgrimage is circumstantial. No written records of such gatherings survive. Another theory proposes that Teotihuacan was a marketplace for trade, a neutral ground where different cultures and kingdoms could exchange goods and ideas. The city's location was strategic, controlling access to the central Mexican highlands and the Gulf Coast. Artifacts from distant regions, including greenstone from Guatemala, shells from the Pacific, and pottery from Veracruz, have been found in abundance. This suggests that Teotihuacan was a hub of commerce, a place where merchants brought their wares and where local craftspeople produced goods for export. But a marketplace alone does not explain the monumental architecture or the elaborate rituals that seem to have taken place in the pyramids. A third theory sees Teotihuacan as a religious capital dedicated to a water deity. The city's name, which means place of the gods in Nahuatl, was given by the Aztecs centuries after it was abandoned. The Aztecs believed the pyramids were tombs of the gods, and they associated the area with creation myths. Recent excavations have added weight to the water deity idea. Underneath the Pyramid of the Sun, archaeologists discovered a tunnel sealed with massive stones. When they entered it, they found chambers filled with offerings, and in one chamber they discovered pools of liquid mercury. Mercury, a rare and precious substance in the ancient world, was known for its reflective, liquid properties. It was often associated with the underworld, with water, and with the divine. The presence of mercury suggests that the chamber was a symbolic or ritual space, perhaps representing a lake or a river in the afterlife. The tunnel also contained pyrite stones, mirrors carved from iron ore that would have glowed like fire in the torchlight. These objects, combined with the mercury, point to a highly sophisticated understanding of the relationship between light, reflection, and the spirit world. The chamber was not just a tomb, it was a carefully constructed stage for ritual performance. But who performed those rituals and for whom? The elites of Teotihuacan may have used these spaces to communicate with gods or to assert their own divine authority. The liquid mercury, which reflects and distorts light, could have been used to create illusions, to make a priest appear to be surrounded by a shimmering lake of fire. The mystery deepens when we consider the city's abrupt and unexplained abandonment. Around the year 650 AD, Teotihuacan began to decline. The population dropped dramatically, the elite compounds were burned, and the great plazas fell silent. No evidence of invasion has been found. There are no mass graves, no signs of a devastating battle. Some researchers suggest that internal conflict, perhaps a rebellion against the ruling class, led to the destruction of the city's political and religious centers. Others propose that drought or environmental degradation made the city unsustainable, but no single cause explains why the people left their magnificent pyramids, their carefully planned neighborhoods, their complex irrigation systems. The city was not demolished, it was abandoned, left to the desert and the wind. When the Aztecs discovered it centuries later, they were in awe of the ruins, believing them to be the work of giants. They gave the site its current name, but they could not explain its purpose, and neither can we. The pyramids of Teotihuacan stand as one of the greatest achievements of the ancient world, a city built with purpose and pride, yet its people took their secrets with them when they vanished. The chambers filled with mercury, the sealed tunnels, the silent pyramids, they all point to a civilization that understood something we are still trying to grasp. And the fact that they left no writing to help us is perhaps the most enduring mystery of all. On the windswept Orkney Islands, a village lay buried for thousands of years. Skara Brae was uncovered in 1850 when a fierce storm stripped away the sand dunes that had hidden it for millennia. What emerged was a Neolithic settlement unlike any other. 8 stone houses connected by covered passageways stood intact with their stone furniture still in place. Beds built into the walls, stone dressers, shelves, and even a primitive toilet system with a drainage channel that carried waste away from the living area. The preservation was so perfect that it felt as if the inhabitants had stepped out only moments before. The drainage system alone was a marvel. Each house had a small stone tank that could hold fresh water, and the entire village was linked by a network of stone-lined drains that channeled runoff and waste away from the homes. This level of civil engineering, built more than 5,000 years ago, suggests a community that prioritized hygiene and organization. Yet for all its clear domestic features, Skara Brae has puzzled archaeologists from the start. The houses are remarkably similar in layout, with the same central hearth, the same bed placements, and the same storage recesses. There is no evidence of social hierarchy within the village. No grander house for a chief, no separate workshop area, no indication of specialized labor. It looks almost like a planned community, built to a standard blueprint. But the most striking mystery lies in what is missing. Despite the excellent preservation, excavators found very little everyday debris. No piles of animal bones from meals, no broken pottery scattered on the floors, no lost tools or discarded clothing. The village appears to have been cleaned out before it was abandoned. The floors were swept, the hearths were cold, and the stone furniture was left empty. This lack of typical domestic refuse has led some researchers to question whether Skara Brae was ever a permanent home for a living community. Perhaps it served a different purpose entirely. One theory proposes that the village was a ceremonial center, a place where people gathered for seasonal rituals or initiations, but never lived full-time. The stone beds and dressers might have been symbolic, used for the display of sacred objects or for ritual sleeping during ceremonies. The lack of daily mess would make sense if the site was only occupied periodically and cleaned thoroughly after each event. The sophisticated drainage system could have been used not just for waste but for water-based rituals, perhaps involving the flow of fresh water through the channels as part of a purification ceremony. The layout of the houses, all identical and connected by covered walkways, might have been designed to control movement and create a specific atmosphere for participants. Another line of evidence adds to the mystery. Scattered across the Orkney Islands and elsewhere in Scotland, archaeologists have found hundreds of carved stone balls. These are perfectly round spheres, usually about 3 inches in diameter, carved with intricate patterns of spirals, concentric circles, and raised knobs. They are made from hard stone like granite or quartzite, and they required enormous skill to shape with primitive tools, yet no one knows what they were used for. They are too large to be sling stones and too decorative to be simple weights. Some have been found in burial sites, suggesting they had ritual significance. Others were discovered in fields or near ancient settlements, including at Skara Brae itself. The balls could have been symbols of status passed between leaders, or they might have been used as measuring devices, their consistent size allowing for standard units of length. Some researchers propose they were thrown in a game, their knobs providing grip, but none of these theories explain why they were carved with such care and variety. The connection between Skara Brae and these mysterious stone balls deepens the question of the village's true function. If the settlement was purely domestic, why did its inhabitants produce objects of such artistic complexity, only to leave them behind? The balls are often found in caches, hidden or stored together, as if they were valuable yet not meant to be used in everyday life. Perhaps they played a role in the very ceremonies that might have taken place in the stone houses. A priest or elder could have held one during a rite, its patterns catching the firelight and reflecting symbolic meaning. The absence of clear answers leaves Skara Brae as an enigma wrapped in perfect preservation. We can walk through its rooms, touch its stone furniture, and trace its drainage channels, yet the lives and beliefs of its builders remain elusive. What was a place with such careful planning and such deliberate cleanliness really for? The fact that we cannot be sure, even with such a complete site, reminds us that the past does not always reveal itself to those who dig. Sometimes the most intact settlements are the ones that keep their deepest purposes hidden. On the coast of Brittany, rows of stones stretch farther than the eye can see. Over 3,000 standing stones rise from the earth in long parallel lines, some reaching nearly 4 kilometers in length. They are not arranged in circles or scattered randomly. They form straight avenues aligned with a precision that suggests deep intent. The largest grouping, at Menek, contains more than 1,000 stones in 11 rows, with the tallest standing over 3 meters high. These stones were erected between 4500 and 3300 BC, long before the Celts arrived in the region. Local legends claim they were Roman soldiers turned to stone by a powerful sorcerer, but the truth is far older and far less clear. The builders left no written records, and no contemporary accounts describe their purpose. The first written mention of the Karnak stones comes from medieval chronicles, more than 4,000 years after they were set in place. The silence is so complete that almost every theory about their function begins with a question mark. The most popular explanation treats the alignments as an enormous astronomical observatory. Researchers have noted that many of the rows line up with the solstices, the equinoxes, and the rising or setting points of certain stars and the moon. Some stones are positioned so that, viewed from a specific spot, they mark the horizon position of the sun at key times of the year. This would have allowed Neolithic communities to track the seasons for planting, harvesting, and scheduling festivals. A calendar of such scale would have been a powerful tool, but it would also have required repeated adjustments over centuries as the Earth's tilt slowly changed. The alignments are not perfect. Some rows point in directions that do not correspond to any known celestial event. This inconsistency has led others to propose a different function. Perhaps the stones marked a processional route for religious ceremonies. The straightness of the rows, the careful spacing, and the lack of obstacles suggest that people once walked between them in an orderly fashion. A priest or leader could have led a crowd from one end to the other, with the stones acting as a sacred pathway that separated the everyday world from the realm of the gods. At the far end of some alignments, there are large circular enclosures called cromlechs, which could have served as gathering places for final rituals. The sheer effort required to erect so many stones points to a project of deep communal importance, perhaps a pilgrimage route that drew people from across the region. Another theory sees the stones as territorial markers, boundaries that define the land of different tribes or clans. The alignments run roughly east to west, dividing the landscape into bands that could have been used to organize ownership, grazing rights, or access to resources. In a world without written property records, a physical marker that everyone could see would have been essential. Yet the stones are not evenly spaced across the territory. They are concentrated in a few dense clusters. This uneven distribution suggests that the boundaries were not purely practical. The alignments may have carried symbolic meaning, linking the land to the sky and to the ancestors. A more recent hypothesis connects the stones to underground water. Some researchers have mapped the alignments and found that they correspond closely to the paths of ancient aquifers and underground streams. The stones may have been placed to mark the presence of water, which was essential for survival in the dry summers of Brittany. Water also held spiritual significance in Neolithic cultures, representing fertility, purification, and the boundary between worlds. If the stones were aligned with water sources, they could have been part of a ritual landscape that honored the life-giving flow beneath the earth. The problem is that all of these theories rest on indirect evidence. There are no tools, no debris, no human remains found in direct association with the stones that would confirm a single purpose. The stones themselves are natural granite monoliths, shaped by the builders only enough to stand upright. No carvings, no inscriptions, no symbols adorn their surfaces. They are blank slates, and we have no way to ask their makers what they meant. Modern research using ground-penetrating radar and geophysical surveys has revealed that the alignments are even more extensive than previously thought. Some of the rows extend beneath the soil, with stones that have fallen or been buried over millennia. The original layout may have been many times larger than what we see today. This suggests that the builders were not just marking a small area but planning a landscape-scale project that covered dozens of square kilometers. The effort required to quarry, transport, and erect thousands of stones, each weighing several tons, was enormous. It would have required a stable food supply, a strong central organization, and a shared belief system that motivated generations of workers. Yet after all that effort, the stones were gradually abandoned. The alignments were not maintained. Eventually, some were covered by soil, some were knocked down for farmland, and others were taken for building material. The purpose that drove the original builders faded into legend. When later peoples encountered the stones, they had no memory of their function. The Karnak stones remain one of the most impressive and most mysterious megalithic sites in the world. They stand in silent rows, waiting for a question that we may never be able to ask. The debate over their true function continues, not because new evidence is scarce, but because the evidence we have points in so many directions. Perhaps the stones were never meant to serve one purpose. They might have been a calendar, a ceremonial road, a territorial statement, and a water marker all at once. Or perhaps their meaning was so specific to the world view of the Neolithic people that it is simply inaccessible to us. What we are left with is the monument itself, a vast and silent question mark carved into the landscape of Brittany. On the African plateau, a different kind of stone question rises from the earth. Great Zimbabwe, the largest ancient stone structure in sub-Saharan Africa, was built by the Shona civilization between the 11th and 15th centuries. Its most famous feature is the Great Enclosure, an elliptical wall that stands over 30 feet tall and stretches more than 800 feet in circumference. The wall is made of thousands of granite blocks, carefully shaped and stacked without any mortar, yet it has stood for centuries without collapsing. Inside the enclosure stands a mysterious conical tower, a solid stone structure about 30 feet high with no clear entrance or chambers. What was it for? That question has sparked one of the longest-running debates in African archaeology. The site is undeniably impressive. The walls rise in graceful curves, with stonework so precise that a single block can lock into its neighbors through natural friction. The Shona builders used a technique called dry stone masonry, fitting each stone by hand without any binding material. The result is a structure that breathes with the landscape, its walls following the contours of the hilltop. At the center of the complex, the conical tower looms over the enclosure, its purpose a complete mystery. Some scholars argue that it was a symbolic grain bin, representing the fertility and wealth of the kingdom. Others see it as an altar for religious ceremonies, perhaps dedicated to the spirits of ancestors. A third theory suggests it was a lookout post, though its solid construction makes that unlikely. The tower has no openings, no stairs, no internal space. It is a monolith, a statement in stone. The Great Zimbabwe was clearly a center of power. Excavations have revealed imported goods from as far away as China, Persia, and India, including porcelain, glass beads, and spices. This evidence points to a thriving trade hub, connected to the Indian Ocean networks that linked East Africa to the wider world. The Shona elite controlled the gold trade, and Great Zimbabwe may have been the administrative and commercial capital of a wealthy kingdom. But trade alone does not explain the massive walls or the ritual spaces. The site contains several enclosures that seem designed for gatherings, with platforms and alcoves that could have hosted ceremonies. The acoustics within the great enclosure are striking. Sound carries differently inside it, with echoes and resonances that would have made any spoken word or chant feel larger than life. Some researchers believe the enclosure was a sacred space for the initiation of leaders or for rain-making ceremonies. The conical tower, visible from many points in the enclosure, might have been a focal point for processions, a physical anchor for a religious landscape. Yet the colonial era twisted the narrative. When European explorers first encountered Great Zimbabwe in the late 19th century, they refused to believe that Africans could have built such a sophisticated structure. They invented theories claiming it was built by Phoenicians, Egyptians, or the Queen of Sheba. These racist ideas were used to justify colonial rule, to argue that the local population had no prior civilization. It was not until the 20th century, through careful excavation and comparison with other Shona sites, that archaeologists conclusively proved the African origin. The stonework, the pottery, the burial patterns all matched the Shona tradition. The colonial denial had been refuted. Still, the specific function of the tower and the full purpose of the enclosures remain unresolved. The tower was never used for storage, and no burials have been found inside it. Its solid construction suggests it was a symbol rather than a practical structure. A symbol of what? Perhaps the conical shape represented the sacred hill where the spirits of ancestors dwelled. Or it may have been a phallic symbol, representing fertility and the continuity of the royal lineage. The acoustics add another layer. In some parts of the enclosure, a single voice can be heard clearly from a distance, while other spots create pockets of silence. This could have been intentional, designed to create a sense of mystery during rituals. A priest speaking from a hidden alcove might have seemed to speak from the stones themselves. The debate continues because the Shona left no written records of their own. What we know comes from archaeology and from later oral traditions which may have changed over centuries. The Great Zimbabwe stands as a monument to a civilization that was both connected to global trade and deeply rooted in its own spiritual traditions. It was a palace, a temple, a market, and a symbol of power, all woven into one complex. The fact that we cannot pinpoint a single purpose does not diminish its significance. It reminds us that great architecture rarely serves only one need. The stone walls still rise above the Zimbabwean plains, and the conical tower still points to the sky, offering a question that may never be fully answered. But the search for that answer continues to deepen our understanding of a sophisticated African civilization that thrived long before European contact. On the island of Malta, temples older than the pyramids still stand. Mnajdra and Haga Kim rise from the Mediterranean landscape as some of the oldest free-standing stone structures ever built. Their walls are made of massive limestone blocks, fitted together without mortar, and their roofs were once covered with corbelled stone, a technique that creates a gently curved ceiling by overlapping each layer inward until the gap closes. These roofs have long since collapsed, but enough remains to reveal a level of engineering that rivals anything from the same era. What makes these temples truly extraordinary, however, is their precise alignment with the sun and stars. Mnajdra, in particular, is oriented so that during the spring and autumn equinoxes, the rising sun shines directly through the main entrance and illuminates a deep niche at the back of the temple. On the summer solstice, the light hits a specific stone in the eastern chamber, and on the winter solstice, it reaches a different one. This alignment was built into the stone centuries before the Greeks or Egyptians began their own astronomical observations. The obvious question is why. The most straightforward theory treats these temples as observatories, places where priests or elders track the seasons to time planting, harvesting, and festivals. The precision of the alignment supports this idea, yet the temples themselves are far more than simple calendars. Inside, you find altars, niches, and small chambers that seem designed for rituals rather than record-keeping. The discovery of dozens of small, rounded female figurines, often called the Fat Lady statues, has led many researchers to propose a fertility cult. These figures, with exaggerated hips, thighs, and breasts, are thought to represent a mother goddess, a deity of life, abundance, and the cycles of nature. The temples, in this view, were places of worship where communities gathered to ask for good harvests, healthy children, and the protection of the earth itself. The figurines were offerings or symbols of that divine presence. But ancestor worship is another strong possibility. The temples contain no large burial chambers, yet small niches and altars could have held the bones or belongings of revered ancestors. The Phoenicians and later the Romans also used the sites for their own rituals, indicating a long tradition of sacred use that may have started with honoring those who came before. The debate grows more complicated when you consider what is missing. Very few everyday objects have been found inside the temples. No cooking pots, no grinding stones, no signs of daily domestic life. This suggests that the temples were not lived in. They were kept clean, perhaps even swept regularly, as if they were set apart from the ordinary world. The lack of debris points to a place used only for special occasions, not as a permanent settlement. So were they observatories or temples? The answer may be both. A single structure could have tracked the sun and moon for agricultural timing, while also serving as the stage for rituals that gave meaning to those celestial events. The light falling on a certain stone on the solstice might have been seen as the goddess herself visiting the sanctuary. The same technology that told people when to plant could also have told them when to pray. The architecture itself reinforces this blend of purpose. The walls of Haga Kim are curved and sweeping, with courses of stone that alternate between large and small blocks, creating a sense of rhythm and movement. The interior spaces feel both intimate and expansive, with the corbelled ceilings once drawing the eye upward toward a central opening that may have been used for smoke or light. It is a design that feels alive, as if the stone itself was shaped to respond to the cycles of the sky. The lack of written records from the temple builders leaves us with only the stones and the figurines. We can never ask them directly what they meant, but the combination of astronomical precision and ritual space suggests a people who saw no separation between the movements of the heavens and the life of their community. The sun marked time, and time marked the rhythm of worship. The temples of Mnajdra and Haga Kim stand as some of the oldest structures ever built for a purpose that was both intellectual and spiritual. They remind us that the line between science and religion may not have existed for ancient people the way it does for us. The question of whether they were observatories or temples is perhaps a question that would have puzzled their builders, who might have seen no need to choose. On the coast of Brittany, a broken giant lies in 4 pieces. The great menhir of Ergra once stood 20 meters tall and weighed 280 tons, making it the largest single monolith ever erected by Neolithic people anywhere in Europe. It would have towered over the landscape, visible from miles away across the flat countryside and from the sea. Today, it lies shattered on the ground, its massive fragments scattered over a short distance. The menhir was already fallen when the first modern surveys were made in the 18th century, so no one knows exactly how or when it broke. Some researchers believe it cracked during the process of being raised, a catastrophic failure that left the builders with a useless monument. Others think it stood for centuries before being toppled by an earthquake or by later settlers who saw it as an obstacle. No evidence of any tool marks or deliberate destruction has been found, so the cause of its collapse remains a mystery. The question of why it was erected in the first place is even more puzzling. The sheer scale of the project is staggering. The menhir was quarried from a rocky outcrop about 10 kilometers away, and the builders had to move a block of stone heavier than a fully loaded jumbo jet across rolling terrain without the wheel or draft animals. They then had to raise it into an upright position using only ropes, wooden levers, and human muscle. There is no trace of the ramp or pit that would have been required for such a lift, and no written record of the event. The effort involved suggests that the menhir held immense importance, but what that importance was is anything but clear. One theory proposes that the great menhir served as a navigational marker for sailors approaching the coast of Brittany. Its height would have made it visible from far out at sea, and its position near the mouth of the river Ore could have guided boats toward a safe harbor. This idea is supported by the fact that other large menhirs in the region are also located near the shoreline or on high ground. But why go to such extremes for a beacon? A wooden tower or a bonfire on the cliffs would have been far easier to build and maintain. The stone itself, with its weight and permanence, argues for a purpose that transcended simple navigation. A second theory sees the menhir as a religious symbol, perhaps representing a deity or an ancestral figure. The phallic shape of many standing stones has led some to propose that they were fertility symbols, markers of a sacred marriage between the earth and the sky. The great menhir, with its enormous size, could have been the central shrine of a regional cult, a place where pilgrims came to offer prayers or leave offerings. No altars or burial remains have been found nearby, however, and the lack of any associated ritual objects makes this interpretation speculative. A third idea suggests an astronomical function. Some of the other standing stones in the Lochmariaca area are aligned with the solstices or with the rising and setting of certain stars. The great menhir, if it was originally positioned in relationship to the sun or the moon, could have been part of a larger calendar system that marked the seasons for agriculture or festival timing. But the menhir is now fallen, and its exact original orientation is impossible to determine with certainty. Without that orientation, the astronomical theory remains a plausible but unproven guess. A fourth theory treats the menhir as a territorial marker, a statement of ownership or power by the community that erected it. In a world without fences or written deeds, a visible landmark of this magnitude would have told every passing group that this land belonged to someone. The effort required to build it would have demonstrated the strength and organization of the local population, warning rivals that they were not to be challenged. This fits with the pattern of other colossal menhirs across Europe, which are often found in clusters that suggest competing groups trying to outdo one another. Yet if that were the case, we would expect to find signs of settlement or fortification near the menhir, and there is none. The site is isolated, with no village or defensive works within sight. The mystery deepens when you consider the other fallen menhirs in the same area. Nearby at Lochmariaca, several other gigantic stones lie on the ground, some weighing over 50 tons. They appear to have been deliberately toppled or abandoned mid-project, as if the entire tradition of raising colossal monoliths was abandoned suddenly. This pattern suggests that the purpose of these stones was tied to a specific belief or social structure that disappeared. When that belief faded, the stones lost their meaning. They were left to fall and be forgotten. The great menhir of Urgra today is a broken monument, but its silence is eloquent. It speaks of a society that poured everything into stone, then vanished without explaining why. Each of the four theories has its strengths and weaknesses, and none can be proven. The menhir remains a question mark, one of the largest and most mysterious objects ever shaped by human hands. What drove the builders to attempt something so ambitious, so fraught with risk, and so permanent? The answer lies somewhere in the fragments, waiting for a future generation to piece it together. A similar puzzle waits on the banks of the Guadalquivir River in southern Spain. The Tartessian culture flourished here more than 2,500 years ago, but almost nothing remains of it above ground. Greek and Roman writers described Tartessos as a wealthy kingdom rich in silver, tin, and copper, a land of advanced craftsmanship and far-reaching trade. They spoke of kings with long reigns and of a writing system that recorded laws and transactions. Yet when modern archaeologists searched for evidence, they found only fragments. A few inscriptions on pottery, some bronze objects, and a handful of stone structures scattered across the landscape. One of the most important of those structures is Cancho Rono, a rectangular building that stands alone in the middle of the countryside. Its walls enclose a series of rooms arranged in a labyrinthine pattern, with narrow passageways that wind inward toward a central chamber. In that chamber, excavators discovered the remains of an altar, a stone platform where offerings were once placed. Ash and traces of burned animal bones suggested that fires were lit there, perhaps as part of a ceremony. The building itself is oriented to the east, and its layout feels deliberate, almost ritualistic. But what exactly was this place for? The simplest theory calls Cancho Rono a temple, a sanctuary where the Tartessians worshipped their gods. The altar and the fire remains support this idea, as does the careful orientation. But the rooms are too many and too varied for a single religious purpose. Some chambers contain storage vessels, others have benches, and one room even has a drain in the floor. This variety suggests that the building served multiple functions at once. A second theory proposes that it was a palace, the residence of a local ruler or chieftain. The central room could have been a throne room, and the smaller chambers could have housed servants or stored goods, yet no signs of daily living have been found. No cooking hearths, no beds, no personal belongings. The building seems too clean, too organized, as if it was used only for special occasions. A third idea sees Cancho Rono as a treasury, a secure place where the community stored its wealth. The labyrinthine layout would have made it difficult for intruders to find the central chamber, and the thick walls could have provided protection. Silver and copper were the lifeblood of Tartessian trade, and a dedicated treasury would have made sense. But again, no hoard of precious metal has been uncovered. The altar suggests that whatever was stored here was not purely material. A fourth theory casts the site as a meeting place for traders, a neutral ground where merchants from different cultures could exchange goods and settle disputes. The many rooms could have accommodated different groups, and the central chamber could have hosted negotiations. The Tartessians were known for their connections with the Phoenicians, Greeks, and local Iberian tribes. A dedicated trading post would have been an asset. Yet the lack of typical market debris such as weights, scales, or fragments of imported goods weakens this interpretation. The most frustrating aspect of the Tartessian mystery is their writing. Classical authors mention that the Tartessians had a distinct script, and a small number of inscribed stones have been found, but the script has never been fully deciphered. It appears to be an alphabet derived from Phoenician, but the number of surviving examples is so small that linguists cannot agree on the meaning of even a single phrase. Without written records, we cannot read the Tartessians' own account of what Cancho Rona was for. We are left guessing from the stones alone, and the stones themselves are incomplete. Around 500 BC, the Tartessian civilization simply disappeared. The written records from other cultures stopped mentioning them. The settlements were abandoned. The trade routes shifted. Some scholars suggest that a period of drought or soil exhaustion made the land unproductive. Others point to the rise of Carthaginian power in the region, which may have absorbed or destroyed the Tartessian network. But no evidence of warfare or mass displacement has been found. The people seem to have faded away, leaving behind only a few enigmatic structures like Cancho Rona. The building itself was eventually covered by sediment and forgotten, until its rediscovery in the 1970s. Today, it stands as one of the most complete examples of Tartessian architecture, yet its function remains as obscure as the culture that built it. Was it a temple, a palace, a treasury, or a meeting house? It may have been all of these at different times or none of them. The silence of the Tartessian script leaves us with only the shape of the building, the orientation of its walls, and the memory of the fires that once burned on its altar. And that is enough to keep the mystery alive. Across the deserts of the Middle East and Central Asia, strange stone shapes stretch across the landscape. Seen from above, they look like enormous kites with long tails, a pattern of low stone walls that converge into a large enclosure. These are the so-called desert kites, and for decades archaeologists thought they understood them perfectly. The traditional explanation called them hunting traps. Hunters would drive herds of wild gazelles or other animals into the wide opening between the guiding walls, then funnel them into a small enclosure where they could be easily killed. The walls were too low to contain the animals, but they were enough to steer them, like a funnel that led to a dead end. This theory made sense given the arid environment, where game was scarce and every successful hunt meant survival. But as more desert kites were discovered across Syria, Jordan, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and even into Central Asia, the sheer scale and variety of these structures began to raise doubts. Some enclosures cover more than 50 acres, and the guiding walls can stretch for several kilometers. The number of animals that could be funneled into a single kite would have been enormous, far more than a single community could use for food. Why build such massive traps if the meat would only spoil? One alternative theory proposes that the kites were not for killing but for gathering. The enclosures might have been designed to capture live animals, not kill them. Herds could be driven into the enclosure, then held there temporarily. This would allow the people to select the healthiest individuals for domestication, a process of taming that could have led to the first herds of sheep, goats, or cattle in the region. The kites would have been living corrals, a technology for managing wild populations rather than exterminating them. The same structures could have been used for seasonal harvesting of animals, taking only what was needed and releasing the rest. A second theory sees a ceremonial purpose. Some desert kites are positioned on hilltops with clear views of the horizon, and their alignment with the rising sun at certain times of the year suggests an astronomical connection. Perhaps the gathering of animals was part of a ritual cycle where the community came together not just for food but for a sacred event. The animals might have been sacrificed, not in the sense of a wasteful slaughter, but as offerings to deities or ancestors, a way to ask for rain, fertility, or protection. The large enclosures could have held the gathered community as much as the animals, with the guiding walls acting as processional pathways that directed both people and beasts toward a central stage. A third idea treats the kites as territorial markers. In the harsh desert, grazing land and water sources were precious. A stone enclosure of this scale would have been a visible statement of ownership. It said to neighboring groups that this territory was claimed and managed. The guiding walls might have been less about directing animals and more about defining boundaries, creating a landscape that was organized and controlled. The fact that so many kites are found in clusters, sometimes overlapping, suggests that different groups were marking their own zones. The debate over desert kites is further complicated by the wide range of design. Some are simple, with a single enclosure and short walls. Others are complex, with multiple chambers, branching walls, and side enclosures. This variation implies that the kites evolved over time, adapting to different needs and environments. A structure that started as a hunting trap might later have been used for gathering, or vice versa. Some kites contain evidence of fires, hearths, and burned bones, pointing to feasting or ritual use. Others are remarkably clean, as if they were only used once or for a single purpose. The true function of any given kite probably depended on the community that built it and the era in which it was used. Recent studies using satellite imagery and drone surveys have revealed hundreds of new kites that were previously invisible from the ground. Many are in remote areas that are difficult to reach on foot, which has forced archaeologists to rely on remote sensing. This has expanded the known distribution of kites across a vast arc from the Arabian Peninsula to the steppes of Kazakhstan. It has also shown that some kites are oriented toward specific astronomical events, such as the solstices or the rising of particular stars. This suggests that the people who built them had a sophisticated knowledge of the sky, an awareness that they encoded into the stone walls. The desert kites remain a puzzle precisely because they are so widespread and so varied. The older theory that they were simple hunting traps has been stretched to its limit. The evidence points toward multiple uses, possibly shifting over centuries. What began as a way to capture food may have become a way to manage herds, define territory, and honor the gods. The kites are a reminder that ancient peoples were not limited by a single need. They built structures that served many purposes, and we are still learning to read the full story written in the stones of the desert. In the heart of the Sahara Desert, a circle of stones marks the sky. The Nabta Playa calendar sits in what is now one of the driest places on Earth, but 7,000 years ago this was a seasonal lake, a shallow basin that filled with water during the monsoons. People came here when the rains returned, bringing their herds and their knowledge of the heavens, and they built something remarkable. The stone circle at Nabta Playa is made of small upright slabs arranged in a ring, with 4 pairs of larger stones forming a cross pattern inside. Radiocarbon dating places its construction around 5000 BC, making it more than 1,000 years older than the earliest phase of Stonehenge. When archaeologists first surveyed the site, they noticed something striking. The 4 pairs of stones are aligned to the cardinal directions, and one pair points directly toward the summer solstice sunrise. Other stones in the complex are aligned with specific bright stars, including Sirius, which was important to later Egyptian civilization. This was not a random arrangement. It was a deliberate astronomical calendar, built by a people who depended on knowing exactly when the monsoon season would arrive. The timing of the rains was a matter of survival. The summer solstice marked the beginning of the wet season, and the rising of Sirius preceded it by a few weeks, giving a warning that the lake would soon fill. By tracking these celestial events, the herders of Nabta Playa could plan their movements across the desert, arriving at the basin just when water and fresh grazing appeared. Yet the stone circle is not the only puzzle at this site. Buried beneath the sand nearby, excavators found several massive megaliths, each weighing several tons, brought from a quarry miles away and deliberately placed in pits. Why bury such enormous stones when they could have been left standing? One theory suggests that the stones were not meant to be seen permanently. They might have been revealed only during certain ceremonies, perhaps when the lake was full and the community gathered for rituals. The act of burying them could have been part of the ritual itself, a way of offering the stones to the earth or to the spirits below. Adding to the mystery are the cattle burials. Several complete cow skeletons were found arranged in clusters, their bones carefully placed in shallow graves and covered with stone slabs. Cattle were the foundation of life for these nomadic herders, providing milk, meat, and hides. A burial of an entire animal, especially one that showed no signs of butchery, suggests a deep ritual significance. Perhaps the cattle were considered sacred, representing wealth, fertility, or a connection to the gods. The combination of an astronomical calendar, buried megaliths, and cattle burials points to a site that was not a settlement. No houses, no hearths, no everyday debris have been found nearby. The people who built the stone circle did not live here full-time. They came to Nabta Playa when the rains filled the basin, and they left when the water dried up. The site was used only during the wet season and only for specialized purposes. This makes it one of the earliest known examples of a purely ceremonial landscape, a place built not for shelter or work but for understanding the sky and honoring the forces that brought life to the desert. The precise function of the stone circle remains debated. It was clearly an astronomical calendar, but was it only a calendar? The energy required to shape and move the buried megaliths, the care given to the cattle burials, the deliberate alignment with the solstice and stars, all suggest that the site held a deeper meaning. It may have been a regional gathering point where scattered bands of herders met at the same time each year to conduct rituals, exchange goods, arrange marriages, and reinforce their shared identity. The stones could have marked the arrival of the rains as much as they marked the passage of the sun, blending practical knowledge with spiritual belief. What remains certain is that the Nabta Playa calendar demonstrates a level of astronomical sophistication that we rarely associate with nomadic herders. These people had no permanent cities, no writing, no metal tools, yet they understood the motion of the sun and stars well enough to build a stone circle that accurately predicted the monsoon season. They recognized the importance of a star like Sirius, which would later become central to Egyptian mythology. They invested enormous effort in creating a monument that served no practical domestic need. The stones of Nabta Playa stand as a quiet testament to a people whose lives were intertwined with the rhythms of the sky, and they leave us wondering what else did they know that the sands have buried. On the cliffs of southern Turkey, a row of temple-like facades stares out over the modern town of Myra. These are the rock-cut tombs of the Lycian civilization, carved directly into the vertical face of the mountain. From a distance, they look like small Greek temples, complete with columns, pediments, and elaborate reliefs. But these are not temples, they are burial chambers, and the people who built them centuries before Christ clearly wanted them to be seen. The most famous of these tombs is the so-called Tomb of Amyntas, named after the Greek inscription carved above its entrance. The facade is stunning. Two Ionic columns support a triangular pediment, and the entire structure is framed by deep recesses that create a dramatic play of light and shadow. It looks like a monument designed to impress, to announce the wealth and status of the person buried inside. Yet when you step through the stone doorway, the impression changes completely. The interior is a single small chamber, roughly cut, with no decoration on the walls and no evidence of any furnishings. It is surprisingly plain. The contrast between the elaborate exterior and the bare interior is the central puzzle of the Lycian tombs. Why invest so much effort in a facade that would be visible from the valley below, while leaving the actual burial space so simple? The official interpretation is straightforward. These are tombs, and the inscriptions on the facades name the occupants and sometimes include a short biography. The interior was meant for the body and a few grave goods. but the absence of any interior adornment has led some researchers to suspect that the chamber was not the main focus of the site. The tomb itself may have been just one part of a larger ritual landscape that included underground chambers, tunnels, and hidden rooms. In the area around Myra, a complex network of subterranean spaces has been found beneath and behind the visible tombs. These chambers are not always accessible from the main tomb entrance. Some are reached by narrow passageways that branch off from the burial chamber, leading into deeper, darker spaces. Their walls are rough, often unfinished, and they contain no remains or grave goods. What were they for? One theory holds that these underground rooms were used by the cult of the dead, a religious group that performed secret rites in honor of ancestors. The plain chambers could have served as meeting halls for initiates, where they conducted ceremonies away from public view. The tomb facade, visible to everyone, would have marked the entrance to a hidden world of ritual. Another theory is more practical. The chambers might have been storage rooms for the funerary equipment that was reused in different ceremonies over generations. Processions, offerings, and feasts required space to prepare and store materials. The rough-cut walls would have been functional, not decorative. A third idea proposes that the underground complex was simply an unfinished expansion. The builders may have intended to carve additional chambers or to decorate the walls, but for reasons unknown, the work stopped. The Lycian inscriptions on the facades give us names and dates, but they do not describe what happened inside. They mention the person buried and sometimes a prayer for protection, but they are silent on the chambers that lie behind the stone. This silence leaves the interior open to interpretation. The discrepancy between the ornate facade and the bare interior suggests that the public face of the tomb was more important than the private space. The tomb of Amyntas was a statement to the living, a marker of status that could be seen from the road and the sea. The interior, hidden from view, was less concerned with display. Whether it held only the body or also served as a stage for hidden rituals, the plain walls refused to give up their secret. The rock-cut tombs of Myra remain a reminder that even when we can read the names on the stone, we may never know the full story of what happened inside. The underground chambers wait in darkness, their true purpose a question that echoes through the empty halls. In the heart of ancient Thebes, 134 columns rise like a forest of stone. The hypostyle hall of Karnak is one of the largest and most impressive covered spaces ever built, a massive hall that covers an area larger than a football field. Each column stands over 70 feet tall, with capitals carved to resemble open papyrus blossoms, their stems and petals rendered in intricate detail. The sheer scale is overwhelming. When you walk through the central aisle, the columns seem to press in from all sides, their shadows shifting with the movement of the sun through the clerestory windows high above. The hall was built during the reign of Seti I and completed by his son Ramesses II, and it was part of the vast temple complex dedicated to the god Ammon. But the hall itself was never simply a passageway or a gathering space. Its design suggests a deeper, symbolic purpose. The columns, arranged in rows of different heights, create a sense of rising order from the side aisles to the central nave. The side aisles are lower, with columns shaped like closed papyrus buds, while the central aisle is taller, with open blossom capitals. This progression from closed to open mirrors the journey from darkness to light, from the earthly to the divine. Many scholars believe the hall was meant to represent the primordial swamp from which creation emerged in Egyptian mythology. In the beginning, according to the Heliopolitan creation myth, the world was a watery chaos called Nun. From that chaos, a mound of earth emerged, and upon it the first god Autumn created all things. The hypostyle hall, with its forest of columns and its dim, humid atmosphere, may have been a physical recreation of that primordial swamp, a space where the pharaoh could connect with the forces of creation itself. The central aisle leading toward the sanctuary would have been the path from chaos to order, a journey the pharaoh undertook during rituals to renew the world. The hall was also the setting for the yearly Apet festival, one of the most important religious events in ancient Egypt. During this festival, statues of the gods Amun, Mut, and Khonsu were carried in a grand procession from the temple of Karnak to the temple of Luxor, traveling along the avenue of sphinxes that connected the two sites. The hypostyle hall was the starting point, the place where the gods were prepared for their journey. Priests would perform rituals here, purifying the statues and reciting prayers before the procession began. But the precise sequence of those rituals, the words that were spoken, and the exact meaning of each action remain largely unknown. The walls of the hall are covered with reliefs and inscriptions, but they are fragmentary and often ambiguous. The reliefs show Seti I and Ramesses II making offerings, but they do not provide a step-by-step script for the ceremony. So while we know the hall was used for the Apet festival, the details of what happened inside it are lost. Another layer of mystery comes from the astronomical alignments built into the hall. The central axis of the hall is aligned with the sunrise on the winter solstice. On that day, the first light of the sun would shine through the main entrance and travel the full length of the hall, illuminating the sanctuary at the far end. This alignment is not accidental. The Egyptians intentionally oriented the hall so that the rebirth of the sun each year was marked by a beam of light reaching the heart of the temple. This suggests that the hall was not just a ceremonial backdrop but an active part of the calendar, a place where the passage of time was tied directly to divine power. Yet the hall also has alignments with other celestial events, including the rising of certain stars, and the exact significance of each alignment is still debated. Some researchers argue that the hall was a giant astronomical instrument, used to predict the flooding of the Nile or to determine the dates of festivals. Others see the alignments as purely symbolic, reinforcing the pharaoh's role as the intermediary between the sun god and the people. The acoustic properties of the hall add another dimension to the mystery. The stone columns, the flat ceiling, and the closed walls create a space where sound behaves unusually. A voice spoken at one end of the hall can be heard clearly at the other end, while other spots produce echoes that seem to come from nowhere. In some areas, a whisper is amplified, in others, it is swallowed. This cannot be accidental. The designers of the hall must have understood how stone and space affect sound, and they used that knowledge to create a dramatic experience for anyone inside. When a priest chanted a prayer, the words would have seemed to fill the entire hall, as if the space itself was speaking. When the pharaoh addressed the gods, his voice would have resonated with authority, amplified by the columns that surrounded him. This acoustic design would have made every ritual feel more powerful, more otherworldly, but the exact rituals that took advantage of these acoustics are unknown. Were there hidden chambers where priests echoed responses to the pharaoh's words? Were there intentional pauses in the ceremony that allowed the silence to speak? The hall is a stage, but the play has been lost. The hypostyle hall of Karnak stands as one of the most magnificent achievements of ancient Egyptian architecture, a blend of engineering, art, religion, and astronomy. Yet for all its grandeur, its full purpose remains elusive. We know it was a place of worship, a symbol of creation, a stage for festivals, and a calendar of the sky. But how those roles combined, and what the people who built it truly intended, is a question that the stone columns still refuse to answer. On a remote butte in the New Mexico desert, a spiral carved into stone waits for the sun to cut it in half. Fajota Butte rises from the canyon floor of Chaco Culture National Historical Park, and on its south face, two large slabs of rock lean against the cliff, creating a narrow gap. Behind them, a spiral petroglyph is etched into the sandstone, At noon on the summer solstice, a thin blade of sunlight passes through that gap and strikes the center of the spiral, bisecting it with a perfect line of light. This phenomenon repeats with variations on the winter solstice and the equinoxes, making the sun dagger one of the most precise celestial markers ever built by the ancestral Puebloans, the people who once thrived in this harsh high desert environment. The carving itself is simple, a single spiral with a few smaller marks nearby, but the engineering behind its alignment is anything but simple. The two slabs were not natural. They were carefully positioned by human hands, moved into place centuries ago to create the narrow channel that filters the sunlight at exactly the right moment. The builders knew the movements of the sun with extraordinary accuracy, and they encoded that knowledge into stone. But why did they go to such trouble? The most widely accepted explanation treats the sun dagger as a calendar, a tool for tracking the seasons in a region where timing was everything. In the arid southwest, the arrival of summer rains or the first frost could mean the difference between a good harvest and famine. Knowing when to plant, when to harvest, and when to hold festivals was critical. The sun dagger marked these turning points, giving the community a reliable annual signal to begin their preparations. But a calendar alone does not explain the effort. The site is not easy to reach, the butt is steep and dangerous, and the petroglyph is tucked into a crevice that only a few people could view at a time. If the goal was simply to tell everyone when to plant, a large open plaza with a shadow stick would have been far more practical. This suggests that the sun dagger served a more exclusive purpose, perhaps tied to religious or political authority. Only a priest or a leader would have climbed to that spot, read the light, and then announce the season to the people below. The dagger could have been a tool of control, a way to validate the power of the elite by linking them directly to the movements of the sun. A different theory proposes that the sun dagger was part of a larger communication network that extended across the entire Chaco world. The ancestral Puebloans built a system of roads, great houses, and signal stations that connected dozens of communities across hundreds of miles. Some researchers have suggested that light signals, perhaps reflected from polished stone or mica mirrors, could have been used to relay messages across the canyon. The sun dagger, with its precise beam, might have been a central node in this network, marking the exact moments when signals were to be sent or received. Recent studies have found that more than just the solstices and equinoxes can be observed at the site. The dagger also tracks the lunar standstill, a rare event that happens every 18.6 years, as well as the positions of certain bright stars. This suggests that the site was not a simple agricultural calendar, but a sophisticated observatory capable of tracking multiple celestial cycles. The ancestral Puebloans, who left no written texts, clearly had a deep understanding of the sky that went far beyond practical needs. They were tracking time on scales that spanned generations, yet without written records, we cannot know exactly what those observations meant to them. The sun dagger is a silent instrument. It still works, still casts its beam on the spiral at the appointed times, but the meaning of that light has been lost. The people who built it vanished from Chaco Canyon around 1200 AD, their culture transformed by drought, resource depletion, or social change. They left behind the great houses, the roads, and the butt with its spiral, but they took the stories with them. The petroglyph remains, waiting for the sun to complete its annual dance, and we are left to wonder what messages the ancestral Puebloans saw written in that silent beam of light. The Olmec built the first great civilization of Mesoamerica, yet their most impressive monuments remain silent about their true purpose. At La Venta and Tres Zapotes, colossal heads carved from volcanic basalt gaze out from jungle clearings, each one weighing several tons and standing over 6 feet tall. These are not delicate sculptures, they are massive portraits with flat faces, thick lips, and helmet-like headdresses, each one unique in expression and detail. The Olmec left no deciphered writing system, so we cannot read their names or hear their stories. The heads must speak for themselves. What were they meant to convey? The most common theory says they are portraits of individual rulers, powerful leaders who controlled the ceremonial centers and demanded to be remembered. Each head would have been a statement of authority, a permanent reminder of who held power. But why only heads? The bodies are missing, and no full body statues of similar scale have been found. Some researchers propose the heads represent ball players wearing protective helmets for the Mesoamerican ball game, a ritual sport that held deep religious meaning. Others suggest they are gods or deified ancestors, their features standardized to represent a divine lineage rather than a specific person. The helmets could be symbols of office, not sports gear. The debate over the heads ties directly into the larger mystery of the Olmec ceremonial centers themselves. These sites are monumental, with massive earthen pyramids, sunken plazas, and elaborate offerings buried beneath the ground. But they lack clear residential areas, no large neighborhoods, no clusters of houses, no signs of permanent habitation. This has led archaeologists to believe that La Venta and Tres Zapotes were not cities in the usual sense. They were built for specific rituals, visited by scattered populations during festivals and ceremonies, then abandoned for most of the year. The centers were stages for performance, not homes for daily life. And the colossal heads were the main actors on that stage. The so-called altars add another layer of confusion. These are large stone blocks, often carved with a figure emerging from a niche on the front. Early explorers called them altars because they assumed they were used for sacrifices or offerings. But later research suggested they were actually thrones, seats of power for rulers or priests. The figure emerging from the niche could represent a ruler emerging from the underworld or a lineage ancestor offering legitimacy. The flat tops of the thrones would have been used for seating, not for burning offerings. Yet without written records, the exact use of the thrones, like the heads, remains a matter of interpretation. The offerings themselves are another clue. At La Venta, archaeologists discovered a massive mosaic floor made of green serpentine blocks, arranged in a pattern that resembles a stylized jaguar face. Above it, layers of colored clay were carefully placed, then covered with more earth, as if the entire construction was meant to be hidden. Why build such a beautiful, permanent floor only to bury it? Perhaps the act of building and burying was the ritual. The offering was not the object itself, but the process of creation and concealment. The same may be true for the massive stone heads. They were carved from basalt quarried dozens of miles away, then transported across rivers and through dense jungle. The effort itself could have been the point, a demonstration of power and devotion that transcended the final sculpture. The Olmec worldview remains frustratingly out of reach. Their art is full of symbols, jaguars, serpents, maze, and human figures with animal features, but we cannot read the grammar of those symbols. The heads stare out from the forest, their expressions calm and unknowable. They are witnesses to a civilization that vanished before the Maya rose, yet their influence spread across Mesoamerica, shaping the art, religion, and politics of everyone who followed. The ceremonial centers of La Venta and Tres Zapotes were the birthplace of that influence, but the specific rituals that took place there, and the exact function of those massive stone faces, are questions that the silence of the Olmec language may never allow us to answer. Across the green hills of Ireland, stone fingers point toward the sky. The round towers of Ireland are some of the most recognizable landmarks in the countryside, tall, slender cylinders of cut stone that rise above the remnants of early Christian monasteries. They stand like sentinels, their conical caps reaching upward, and they have been a source of wonder for centuries. The traditional explanation, taught in schools and repeated in guidebooks, is that these towers were bell towers, places where monks would ring the call to prayer, or refuges where they could retreat during Viking raids. The high entrance, often located 10 or 15 feet above the ground, would have required a ladder, one that could be pulled up to keep attackers out. This story fits neatly with the monastic setting, but it leaves too many questions unanswered. Inside, the towers are hollow. They have no internal floors, no wooden platforms, no stone vaults to support multiple levels. The walls are bare, and the only light comes from a few small windows that align with specific directions. If these were bell towers, where would the bell have hung? There are no brackets, no holes for beams, no evidence of a permanent structure inside. A bell could have been suspended from the top, but the narrowness of the interior would have made swinging it impossible without striking the walls. The refuge theory also has problems. A tower with no internal floors and only a single high entrance would have been a death trap, not a safe haven. Once the ladder was pulled up, the people inside would have been trapped with no way to escape if the attackers set fire to the base. The lack of any hearth or smoke vent suggests they were not designed for prolonged occupation. So why build them? The orientation of the towers provides a different clue. Many are aligned with important Christian feast days, such as the rising sun on the feast of a local saint. Others are oriented toward ancient pagan sites, like burial mounds or stone circles that predate the monasteries. This suggests that the towers were not simply Christian additions, but may have been part of an older, pre-Christian landscape that was later absorbed into the new religion. The astronomical alignments are precise. Some towers line up with solstices and equinoxes, casting shadows that mark the turning of the year. This has led some researchers to propose that the towers were solar observatories, built by a culture that understood the movements of the sun and moon with great accuracy. They could have been used to time planting, harvesting, and the great festivals that unified scattered communities. The entrance, high above the ground, might have been designed so that only the priest or astronomer inside could see the light hitting a certain stone on the floor, a private revelation of the changing season. Another theory suggests the towers were beacons. In a landscape without tall trees, a stone tower visible for miles could have served as a signal station. Fires lit at the top could relay messages across the countryside, warning of danger or announcing celebrations. The narrow windows, aligned with neighboring towers, would have allowed a chain of light to spread rapidly like a prehistoric telegraph. The conical roofs, often made of stone, would have protected the fire from rain. Yet no charred remains have been found, and the effort required to build such a tower for a simple beacon seems extreme. A third idea proposes that the towers were used for storing sacred relics, such as the bones of saints or important books. The high entrance would have deterred thieves, and the thick stone walls would have kept the interior dry and cool. Relics were the most valuable possessions of a monastery, drawing pilgrims and their donations. A secure, weatherproof tower would have been the ideal treasury. But again, there are no shelves, no niches, no signs of storage within the walls. The interior is too smooth, too empty. The most provocative discovery is that many of these towers predate the Christian monasteries they are now associated with. Radiocarbon dating of mortar and foundation material has given dates that stretch back into the Iron Age or even earlier, centuries before St. Patrick brought Christianity to Ireland. This means the towers were already standing when the first monks arrived, standing as silent reminders of a previous culture. The monks did not build them, they inherited them. They repurposed these ancient structures, adding their own crosses and carving their own symbols, but the towers themselves are far older than the Christian faith that adopted them. This shifts the entire mystery. If the towers were not built by Christians, then they were built by a people whose beliefs we know almost nothing about. The people of pre-Christian Ireland left no written records of their own. Their stories were passed down orally and later written by Christian scribes who often reshaped them to fit a biblical worldview. The towers could have been temples, observatories, or meeting places for druids and bards. They could have marked sacred sites where the boundary between the mortal world and the spirit world was thin. The fact that the monks chose to build their monasteries around these towers rather than tearing them down suggests they recognized the power of the places. They did not destroy the old stones, they sanctified them. The round towers of Ireland remain one of the most elegant and stubborn puzzles of European archaeology. They are beautiful, simple, and utterly silent. The traditional story of bell towers and refuges is comforting, but it does not hold up to scrutiny. The lack of internal floors, the high entrances, the astronomical alignments, and the pre-Christian origins all point to a much older and more complex function. What drove an earlier people to invest so much effort in raising these slender stone needles across the landscape? They are not fortresses, not homes, not tombs. They are something else, something we have not yet learned to read. And as new dating techniques and surveys continue to reveal more of their secrets, the mystery only deepens. The towers stand waiting for the question that will unlock their true purpose. On the slopes of Mount Parnassus, a circular building sits without a clear purpose. The Tholos at Delphi is one of the most elegant structures from the ancient Greek world, a ring of 20 Doric columns supporting a conical roof, its proportions so refined that architects still admire its harmony. Today, only 3 of those columns remain standing, but enough of the foundation survives to reveal a design that was both beautiful and deliberate. And yet, after more than a century of excavation and study, no one can say for certain what the Tholos was built for. The sanctuary of Delphi itself is famous as the home of the oracle, the priestess who delivered cryptic prophecies that shaped the decisions of kings and city-states. But the Tholos was not part of the oracle's direct workings. It stood apart, a short distance from the main temple of Apollo, in a zone that also held the treasuries of various Greek cities. Those treasuries themselves raise questions. Why would a city like Athens or Siphanos build a small temple-like structure at Delphi, filled with offerings and inscriptions? The standard answer is that they were storehouses for votive gifts, a way for each city to display its wealth and piety in a neutral, sacred space. But the placement and design of the treasuries suggest they were more than mere storage. They lined the sacred way, the path that pilgrims walked on their way to the oracle. Each treasury was a statement of identity, a billboard for a city's power, myths, and victories. The Athenian treasury, for example, was decorated with reliefs of Theseus and Heracles, pairing the city's legendary hero with the pan-Hellenic champion. The Siphaean treasury was adorned with scenes from the Trojan War, a way to claim a role in the grand narrative of Greek history. These buildings were not just boxes for treasure, they were performances in stone designed to influence the visitors who passed by. The Tholos, however, belongs to a different category. Its circular shape sets it apart from the rectangular temples and treasuries. Round buildings in ancient Greece were rare and usually had specific functions, such as public dining halls or tombs. The Tholos at Delphi has no interior columns to support a heavy roof, meaning it was likely open to the sky or covered with a light wooden structure. The floor inside was paved with a pattern of contrasting stones, and there is evidence of a central hearth or altar. Early archaeologists proposed that it was a temple of Artemis, the goddess of the hunt and the wilderness, who is sometimes worshipped alongside Apollo at Delphi. But no inscription naming Artemis has been found on site. Another theory suggests it was a ceremonial dining hall for the priests and dignitaries who attended the Pythian Games, the athletic and musical competitions held every 4 years in honor of Apollo. The circular shape would have allowed equal seating for all, a symbol of the equality among the participants. Yet no cooking hearths or food remains have been discovered, and the building seems too small to have hosted large banquets. A third idea transforms the Tholos into an astronomical instrument. The columns are spaced at intervals that align with the rising and setting of certain stars. Some researchers have proposed that the tholos was used to track the movements of the sun and the moon, perhaps to determine the dates of festivals or to predict eclipses. The central hearth could have served as a gnomon, a fixed point for casting shadows, but the alignments are not precise enough to support a purely observational function, and no records from ancient Greece mention the tholos in connection with astronomy. Meanwhile, at the heart of the sanctuary, another mystery stands: the omphalos stone. This carved marble object, shaped like a beehive or a rounded cone, was said to mark the center of the world. According to Greek myth, Zeus released two eagles from opposite ends of the earth, and they met at Delphi, where he placed the omphalos. The stone itself is covered with a network of carved ribbons, a pattern that resembles the wrapping of a sacred object. But the omphalos that tourists see today is a Roman copy, placed there centuries after the original was lost. What the original stone looked like and where it came from is unknown. Some scholars believe it was a meteorite, a piece of iron that fell from the sky and was considered a divine object. Others think it was simply a natural stone formation that the early inhabitants of Delphi adopted as a sacred marker. The confusion deepens when we consider that Delphi may not have always been dedicated to Apollo. Archaeological layers beneath the temples show evidence of earlier worship, possibly of the earth goddess Gaia or of the Titaness Themis, a figure associated with prophecy and divine order. The serpent python, whom Apollo was said to have slain to claim the sanctuary, may represent a shift from an older, chthonic tradition to a newer, Olympian one. The omphalos stone, then, could be a relic from that earlier cult, a marker of a sacred place that predated Apollo. The change in patron deity would explain why some aspects of the site seem mismatched. The oracle itself, with its prophetic priestess and its mysterious vapors, fits the traditions of earth goddess worship far better than the clear, rational domain of Apollo. In this view, Delphi was never a single, coherent institution. It was a layered site where different religious practices and political agendas overlapped across centuries. The tholos, the treasuries, and the omphalos are fragments of that layered history, each one pointing to a different purpose that may have shifted over time. The tholos may have been built for one reason, then reused for another, its original meaning forgotten even by the people who maintained it. The treasuries may have begun as neutral depositories but evolved into competitive displays of power, shaping the experience of every pilgrim who walked the sacred way. And the omphalos, that strange stone at the center, may be a key that we cannot turn because the lock has changed. The sanctuary of Delphi remains one of the most studied sites in the ancient world, yet its deepest secrets lie not in the oracle's prophecies but in the silent structures that surrounded it. What did the tholos truly mean to those who built it? Why did the city-states invest such wealth in treasuries that most visitors would never enter? And what power did the omphalos hold before it became a tourist photo? The stones of Delphi do not answer these questions, but they keep them alive, waiting for a theory that can fit all the pieces together. Roman concrete has outlasted the empire that invented it. 2,000 years after the Pantheon was built, its unreinforced concrete dome still stands as the largest of its kind ever constructed. The material has proven more durable than modern concrete, which often crumbles after a few decades of exposure to weather and salt. Yet the precise recipe that gave Roman concrete its incredible longevity was lost when the empire fell. Only in the last few decades have scientists begun to understand the key ingredients, and even now, the full process remains a subject of intense study. The Pantheon itself is a perfect example of this mystery. Its dome spans 142 feet, and at its very center, an opening called the oculus lets in a beam of light that shifts throughout the day and across the seasons. Was this purely an architectural necessity, a way to lighten the dome and reduce stress on the walls, or did the oculus serve a deeper, astronomical or religious purpose? The most straightforward explanation treats the oculus as a structural solution. By leaving the top open, the builders eliminated the need for a heavy keystone and reduced the overall weight of the dome. But the Romans were not strangers to closed domes. They had built smaller ones before. The decision to leave the Pantheon open suggests more than just engineering. On the spring equinox, the light entering the oculus strikes the entrance threshold precisely, as if the building itself was designed to mark the turning of the seasons. On other days, the beam travels across the interior, illuminating different niches and statues. This could have allowed priests or officials to track the passage of time, perhaps to schedule religious ceremonies or public events. The dome itself was originally covered in bronze tiles that glowed in the sunlight, making the building a visible landmark across the city. The oculus may have been the focus of a daily ritual, a moment when the emperor or the chief priest stood directly beneath the opening and was bathed in light, symbolizing a connection with the heavens. Without written instructions from the builders, we cannot know for certain. The mystery deepens when you consider the concrete used for the dome. Modern analysis has shown that Roman concrete contained volcanic ash, lime, and seawater, which triggered a chemical reaction that created a rare mineral called aluminum tobamorite. This mineral actually strengthens the concrete over time, rather than weakening it by filling in microscopic cracks as they form. This self-healing property is something modern engineers have only recently begun to replicate. The Romans apparently discovered this formula through trial and error, but they left no written recipe. The knowledge was passed down through generations of builders and then lost when the trade routes that supplied the volcanic ash collapsed. The same concrete was used for harbor structures, such as the one at Caesarea Maritima in modern Israel. There, the Romans built massive breakwaters and piers by pouring concrete into wooden forms underwater. The blocks hardened in contact with seawater, creating structures that have survived 2 millennia of storms and rising sea levels. Modern concrete, by contrast, often degrades quickly in marine environments because of chemical reactions that weaken the cement. The Romans somehow solved a problem that we still struggle with today. What other lost knowledge lies in their concrete? The formula was not written down because it was considered a trade secret, passed from master builder to apprentice. When the empire crumbled, that chain of transmission broke. The Pantheon and the harbors remained as silent witnesses to a skill that vanished. The oculus still opens to the sky, letting in the same light that once marked ceremonies we can only imagine. The concrete still holds stronger than it was a millennia ago, and we are left to wonder what other secrets the Romans carried with them into the dust. Every spring and autumn, a serpent carved from light slithers down the steps of El Castillo. As the late afternoon sun strikes the northwest corner of the pyramid, a series of triangular shadows forms along the balustrade, creating the illusion of a feathered serpent descending from the top to the bottom, where a giant stone serpent head waits at the base. The effect lasts for only a few minutes, a precise intersection of architecture, astronomy, and artistry that has drawn crowds for over 1,000 years. The Maya who built this pyramid clearly understood the movements of the sun with extraordinary depth. They aligned the structure so that on the equinoxes, the light and shadow would paint this living symbol of Kukulkan, the feathered serpent god, onto the very stones. But what was the pyramid itself for? The mainstream answer calls El Castillo a temple, a place of worship dedicated to Kukulkan, where priests conducted ceremonies and made offerings. The serpent shadow would have been the centerpiece of a grand ritual, a moment when the god himself seemed to visit the earth. Yet the pyramid is also a calendar. Its 4 staircases have 91 steps each, plus the top platform, totaling 365, the number of days in a solar year. The 9 tiers of the pyramid body, when viewed from above, create 18 sections, which matches the number of months in the Maya calendar. The structure is covered in numerical symbolism that tracks the sun, the moon, and the planet Venus. It is a three-dimensional almanac, a schedule of cosmic events etched into stone. But a calendar does not explain the inner chambers. In the 1930s, archaeologists tunneling into the pyramid discovered an earlier structure hidden inside, a smaller pyramid built over by the later, larger one. Inside that inner pyramid, they found a throne in the shape of a jaguar, painted red with spots made of jade, its eyes and fangs rendered in white shell. The throne sits empty now, but it implies that the pyramid was more than just a temple or a calendar. It was a seat of power. Some believe that important rulers were buried here, their tombs sealed within the core of the monument. Others argue that the throne was used for initiation ceremonies, where a new leader would sit in the presence of the god before emerging to the public. The jaguar itself is a symbol of the underworld and of royal authority, blending the roles of priest, king, and warrior. So was El Castillo a temple, a calendar, a tomb, or a throne room? The evidence suggests it was all of these, layered over centuries of use and modification. The Maya did not build a single structure for a single purpose. They built a living monument that evolved with their beliefs, their rulers, and their understanding of the cosmos. The outer pyramid was added to encase and protect the inner one, perhaps to renew its power or to enlarge its presence. Each generation added its own layer, both physically and symbolically. The serpent shadow may have been a later refinement, a way to tie the new construction to the old rituals. One of the strangest details at El Castillo is the acoustic chirp. If you stand at the base of the pyramid and clap your hands, the sound that echoes back is not a simple clap but a chirp, a sharp rising note that resembles the call of the Quetzal bird, which was sacred to the Maya. This effect is so precise that it can be reproduced at any point along the base, and it has been measured and recorded by modern scientists. Some researchers argue that this was an accident, a quirk of the step geometry. Others believe it was intentional, a way to make the pyramid itself sing. A pilgrimage to the top might have been accompanied by claps that sounded like the call of the sacred bird, creating an acoustic landscape that blended human action with the voice of the temple. The chirp echoes in the same way that the serpent shadow appears, at a specific moment and in a specific place. The Maya, who had no written instructions for us, left clues in stone and sound. The pyramid of Kukulkan still performs its tricks every equinox, the serpent still descends, the chirp still rings out. But the full meaning of that performance, the story it was meant to tell, remains a puzzle that we can only guess at. The same walls that puzzle engineers may have served a purpose hidden in plain sight. When you look at Sacsayhuamán from above, the three parallel zigzag walls do not just look like fortifications. They also resemble a series of terraces, each one stepping down the hillside. And this shape has led some researchers to ask whether the primary function was not military but hydraulic. The walls are built in a pattern that could have collected and channeled rainwater, directing it toward the city below. The zigzags slow the flow of water, preventing erosion and allowing it to soak into the ground rather than rushing downhill and washing away soil. And the perfectly fitted stones, which we already know are so tightly joined that nothing can pass between them, would have made the walls themselves waterproof. In effect, Sacsayhuamán might have been a massive water management system, a series of cisterns and terraces designed to capture, store, and distribute the seasonal rains. The Incas were masters of hydrology. They built aqueducts and canals that still function today, and they understood that controlling water was essential for agriculture and for life in the high Andes. The zigzag walls could have been part of that system, creating a series of stepped pools where water would gather, slowly filtering through the stone and being released into channels that fed the terraced fields around Cusco. Some archaeologists have even found traces of clay linings and drainage channels behind the walls, lending weight to the idea that the structure was engineered for water storage, not defense. But the counterargument is equally strong. The walls are massive, more than 20 feet high in places, and they form a defensive line that would have been extremely difficult for an attacking force to breach. The zigzag shape itself is a standard military design, creating overlapping fields of fire and preventing an enemy from approaching the wall in a straight line. And the location on a steep hill overlooking Cusco gives the defenders a commanding view of the entire valley. For centuries, this was the story told by Spanish chroniclers and later historians. Sacsayhuamán was a fortress, the last line of defense for the Inca capital. Yet no records of a major battle fought here exist, and the Incas themselves seem to consider the site more of a ceremonial center than a stronghold. The zigzag walls could have been purely symbolic, representing the teeth of the sacred puma, with the city of Cusco itself forming the body. In that interpretation, the walls were not meant to keep enemies out but to create a sacred boundary, a threshold between the everyday world and the realm of the gods. The debate over whether these walls were defensive, symbolic, or hydraulic is one of the most active in Andean archaeology today. Recent studies using ground-penetrating radar and hydrological modeling have shown that the walls do align with natural water flows and that the terraces behind them could have supported crops. At the same time, the seismic stability of the interlocking polygonal stones is beyond question. In an earthquake-prone region, the ability of those irregular blocks to shift slightly without collapsing would have protected the structure from destruction, something a straight-walled fortress could never do. That seismic resilience may have been a happy accident, or it may have been a deliberate design consideration that the Inca engineers understood through centuries of trial and error. So which theory is correct? The answer may be that Sacsayhuamán served all three purposes at once. The same walls that captured rainwater also formed a formidable defensive line, and both functions were wrapped in a symbolic shape that expressed the power and identity of the Inca state. The Incas did not separate practical needs from sacred ones. Their architecture was a seamless blend of utility and meaning, and the zigzag walls of Sacsayhuamán are perhaps the purest expression of that integration. We may never know exactly how much weight each function carried in the minds of the builders, but the fact that the walls still stand, still channel water after heavy rains, and still provoke debate among experts is a testament to the depth of their design. The mystery is not that we cannot decide what the walls were for. It is that they were so cleverly made that they could be used for so many things at once. And that may be the greatest engineering achievement of all. A vast underground city once operated beneath the Roman Colosseum. Visitors today walk on a wooden floor that covers a complex of corridors, cages, ramps, and elevators that extends 2 stories below the arena. This hidden structure is called the Hypogeum, and it was the engine room of the greatest entertainment venue of the ancient world. Yet despite decades of excavation and study, the exact details of how it worked remain surprisingly uncertain. The Hypogeum was built not when the Colosseum first opened, but about a decade later, when Emperor Domitian ordered a complete redesign of the underground space. The result was a network of narrow passageways and rooms that could be opened by trapdoors, allowing animals, scenery, and performers to appear suddenly in the middle of the arena. The elevators used a system of ropes, pulleys, and counterweights, operated by teams of laborers who must have coordinated their movements with perfect timing. But no written manual survives, no engineer left a diagram, no historian described the full system. All we have are the stone channels, the grooves for the ropes, and the socket holes for the beams. From these clues, researchers have reconstructed the basic operation, but major questions remain. Could the Hypogeum be flooded quickly enough to stage a naval battle? Ancient writers mention that the Colosseum was sometimes filled with water for mock sea fights called naumatia. but the Hypogeum would have been underwater, ruining the machinery. Some scholars argue that those early naval battles took place before the Hypogeum was built, when the arena floor was simply a flat surface that could be flooded and drained. Others propose that the Hypogeum was later adapted with watertight doors, or that the naval spectacles were moved to other venues. The stonework itself shows no clear evidence of a waterproofing layer, so the debate continues. Another mystery is the sheer variety of shows that the Hypogeum could support. The trapdoors and elevators were not just for animals. They could also raise large pieces of scenery, including trees, mountains, and even entire ships on wheels. This means that the Colosseum was not just a venue for combat and hunts. It was a theater capable of staging elaborate mythological scenes, where actors could appear to rise from the underworld or become trapped in a collapsing set. The limited written records that survive, mostly from Roman historians like Suetonius and Dio Cassius, mention only a few specific events. They describe hunts involving lions, bears, and elephants, as well as executions woven into mythological reenactments. But they never explain how the machinery was operated, how long the performances lasted, or how the workers coordinated their movements in the dark below the arena. The Hypogeum had no windows. The only light came from torches and from the trapdoors above. The workers must have memorized the positions of every cage and every hoist, moving in near darkness while the crowd above cheered and screamed. The debate over the Hypogeum also touches on the nature of Roman spectacle itself. Some researchers argue that the games were primarily about mass entertainment, a way for the emperor to distract the population with violence and wonder. Others see a deeper ritual purpose. The hunts were not just killings, they were performances of order over chaos, where the emperor demonstrated his power by controlling dangerous beasts and staging scenes from myth. The Hypogeum, with its hidden machinery, allowed these performances to seem magical, as if the gods themselves were intervening in the arena. The sudden appearance of a lion or a giant tree would have amazed the audience, reinforcing the idea that the emperor could command the forces of nature. But without detailed records, the line between entertainment and ritual blurs. The Hypogeum is a machine whose purpose we can guess at, but whose true rhythm of use, the exact sequence of shows, the specific cues for the workers, and the full range of spectacles it supported are lost to time. What we do know is that this underground system was one of the most sophisticated mechanical achievements of the ancient world. It required precise engineering, constant maintenance, and a large crew of trained operators. The Colosseum itself seated 50,000 people, and the Hypogeum made sure that those people were never bored. Yet the silence of the written record leaves a puzzle that even modern reconstruction cannot fully solve. The trapdoors still open, but the machinery that pulled them is gone, and the stories of what once emerged from the depths remain incomplete. A ring of giant shafts surrounds a massive settlement just 2 miles from Stonehenge. Durrington Walls was already known as one of the largest Neolithic settlements in Britain, a place where thousands of people once gathered for feasts during the winter solstice. Pig bones, cattle remains, and broken pottery tell a story of massive communal meals, of people traveling from across the region to share food and drink in a celebration that must have been the highlight of the year. But in the last few years, a discovery made with ground-penetrating radar has changed everything. The settlement is not just a collection of houses and a timber circle. It is encircled by a ring of enormous pits, each more than 30 feet wide and nearly 15 feet deep. The pits form a perfect arc that stretches for nearly 2 miles, and when combined with natural features like river cliffs and dry valleys, they create a continuous boundary that encloses the entire site. The scale is staggering. The builders dug these pits using antler picks and shoulder blades, moving thousands of tons of earth without metal tools, and then, for reasons unknown, they filled them back in. The pits were not left open. they were deliberately backfilled, and the soil contained fragments of animal bone, pottery, and charcoal from the feasts. This means the pits were dug, likely used for some purpose, and then ceremonially closed. The question is what that purpose was. One theory proposes that the pits were boundary markers, a way to define the sacred space around Durrington Walls and separate it from the everyday world. The ring would have been visible for miles, a clear statement that this land belonged to the ancestors or the gods. Another idea sees the pits as part of a processional route. The avenue that leads from Durrington Walls to the River Avon is already known, a wide path lined with banks and ditches that may have been used for ritual processions carrying the dead toward the river for their final journey. The ring of pits could have been stations along that route, places where participants paused to make offerings or perform ceremonies before continuing to the water. The astronomical alignments of the pits add weight to this interpretation. Some of the pits line up with the midwinter sunset, the same alignment that marks the solstice at Stonehenge itself. This suggests that the entire landscape, from Durrington Walls to the river to Stonehenge, was part of a unified ritual system that followed the movements of the sun. A third theory treats the pits as a defensive structure. The steep sides and sheer depth would have made them difficult to cross, creating a barrier that protected the settlement from wild animals or rival groups. But no evidence of conflict has been found at Durrington Walls. The feasting debris suggests a peaceful gathering, not a fortified stronghold. A fourth idea proposes that the pits were part of a calendar, each one aligned with a different celestial event, marking the days for planting, harvesting, and festival. The effort required to dig them, however, seems extreme for a simple calendar. A series of wooden posts would have served the same purpose with far less labor. The most compelling view combines several of these functions. The pits may have been dug to mark a sacred boundary, used during processions that followed the solar calendar, and then filled with the remains of the feasts as a final offering. The act of building and then closing the pits could have been the ritual itself, a way for the community to renew their connection to the land and the heavens. The avenue linking Durrington Walls to the River Avon may have been the route by which the dead were carried, and the timber circles within the settlement may have been places where the living prepared their final farewells. The river itself, flowing toward the sea, would have carried the remains to the afterlife. Durrington Walls sits at the heart of a vast ceremonial landscape that includes Stonehenge, Woodhenge, and dozens of burial mounds, all of them connected by paths and alignments that we are only beginning to map. The Superhenge and its ring of shafts represent the latest chapter in a story that has been unfolding for over a century, and each new discovery raises more questions than it answers. Why did the builders devote so much effort to digging these pits only to fill them again? What ceremonies took place at each station along the avenue? And how did the feasts at Durrington Walls connect to the solstice rituals at Stonehenge, just 2 miles away? The pieces of the puzzle are scattered across the landscape, and we have only begun to fit them together. The mystery of the Superhenge, like the 30 sites that came before it, refuses to close. It leaves us with an open question and a landscape full of hidden answers, waiting for the next generation of researchers to uncover what the Neolithic people chose to bury. Across 30 sites, one pattern repeats with striking consistency. Astronomical alignments appear in places as distant as the highlands of Bolivia and the islands of Malta, built by cultures that never knew each other existed. Yet all of them looked to the same sky and found meaning in its movements. The engineering feats at these sites push against the limits of what we thought was possible, with stones moved over impossible distances, fitted together without mortar, and shaped with a precision that still challenges modern tools. And woven through every one of them is a thread of ritual ambiguity, spaces that were clearly important yet defy a single explanation, as if their builders intended them to be layered with meaning that would shift across generations. What drove these ancient people to invest so much of their lives, their resources, and their collective effort into structures that served no obvious practical need? The answer seems to be a universal human drive to create meaning through monumental construction, to anchor beliefs, identity, and memory in something that would outlast any individual life. The pyramids, the stone circles, the underground chambers, and the carved hillsides are all expressions of that same impulse, a desire to leave a mark on the world that says we were here, we believed something, and we wanted it to last. Why then do definitive answers remain so elusive? Part of the reason is that the cultures who built these sites left behind no written records that explain their intentions. Their knowledge was passed down through oral tradition, through apprenticeship, and through ritual practice, all of which vanished when those societies changed or collapsed. We are left with the physical remains, which are like reading a book with most of the pages torn out. The few fragments that survive are open to interpretation, and every generation brings its own assumptions to the task. Another challenge is that we are trying to understand symbolic behavior from the outside. A stone alignment that looks like an astronomical calendar to us might have been primarily about something else entirely, something that made perfect sense within the belief system of its builders but is inaccessible to us now. The serpent shadow at Chichen Itza may have marked the equinox, but what did the equinox mean to the people who watched that shadow descend? We can measure the angles, but we cannot measure the feeling in the chest when the god appeared. This is where ongoing research continues to refine our theories. New technology, from ground-penetrating radar to drone surveys to chemical analysis of ancient mortar, keeps revealing details that previous generations of archaeologists missed. The ring of pits at Durrington Walls was invisible to the naked eye for 5,000 years, only discovered when radar mapped the ground beneath the soil. Who knows what other structures lie hidden, waiting for the right tool to reveal them? The mystery is not a failure of our knowledge, it is an invitation to keep asking better questions. So I will leave you with this thought. Which of these 30 sites do you find most puzzling? Is it the buried stones of Göbekli Tepe, the impossible precision of Puma Punku, the serpent of light at Chichen Itza, or the hidden chambers under the Colosseum? Do you have a theory of your own about what any of them were really for? Share your thoughts in the comments, because the conversation about these places is just as important as the discoveries themselves, and every perspective adds another piece to the puzzle. If you enjoyed this journey through the ancient world's deepest mysteries, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next deep dive into the enigmas that keep historians and archaeologists awake at night. The stones are still waiting, and so are the questions.